Hello there and welcome to History for Lunatics. I am so glad you are here tonight. Pull up something comfortable. Maybe a blanket, maybe a warm drink, maybe just the quiet corner of the room where the day finally stops asking things from you. Tonight we're going somewhere that does not look quiet at first. We're going to the mud of France, to the training camps of America, to the troop ships crossing the Atlantic, to the long roads where young men marched under packs that rubbed their shoulders raw. But we're not going there to talk only about battles, not at first. Not about the famous charges, not about the generals leaning over maps, not about the big names that usually take up the whole page. Tonight we're going to look at something smaller, stranger, and in some ways more revealing. We're going to look at what American soldiers in the First World War were not allowed to do. That sounds simple at first, almost like a list from a dusty army handbook. Do not leave camp. Do not disobey orders. Do not talk about troop movements. Do not drink too much. Do not wander into the wrong part of town. Do not strike a match at night. Do not remove your gas mask because you think the air feels clear. Do not write home and tell your mother exactly where you are. Do not take what is not yours. Do not fall asleep when your turn comes to watch the dark. But once you sit with those rules for a moment, once you imagine a real person living inside them, they stop feeling like paperwork. They become a fence around a human life. A soldier did not just carry a rifle in World War I. He carried restrictions. He carried the army's hand on his shoulder, in his pocket, in his letters, in his evenings, in his sleep. And sometimes the things he was forbidden to do tell us more about the war than the things he was ordered to do. Before we step into that world, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? Are you listening late at night when the house has gone still and the small sounds start to become noticeable? Are you on your couch, in bed, in a kitchen with one light left on, or maybe somewhere far from where I'm imagining you? If you feel like sharing it, tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always find it strange and kind of wonderful that a story about a soldier standing in a cold French trench more than a century ago can find someone in a modern room, under modern lights, with a phone nearby and a warm place to sleep. History has a way of crossing that distance quietly. It just sits down beside you and waits till you notice it. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, if you like history told slowly, with the small details left in, the kind of details that make the past feel less like a textbook and more like a room, you can step inside. It would mean the world to me if you hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. You do not have to do it right now. Do it when you feel it. When something in the story makes you pause for a second, or picture a face, or think about a thing you have never really thought about before. That is usually the moment that tells you the story has reached you. Now let us go back. Not all the way to the beginning of the war in Europe, not to August of 1914, when the old empire started moving like heavy furniture being dragged across the floor. We're going to begin a little later in 1917, when the United States formally entered the war against Germany on April 6th, and young American men began moving into an army that had to grow almost faster than anyone could understand. General John J. Pershing was placed in command of the American Expeditionary Forces in France, and by the end of the war, more than 2 million American troops would serve there. Picture one of them. Not a hero yet, not a statue, not a name carved into a memorial. Just a young man standing in a line at a camp somewhere in the United States. Maybe Camp Meade in Maryland, Camp Funston in Kansas, Camp Dix in New Jersey, Camp Lee in Virginia, one of those enormous temporary cities of wood, canvas, mud, smoke, and shouting that seemed to rise almost overnight. He might be 19, he might be 26, he might have come from a farm, a machine shop, a college classroom, a mining town, a city tenement, a small store where everyone knew his father's name. Before the army, he may have been able to walk out the door when he wanted. He may have been able to stay up late, speak carelessly, write freely, drink if he could afford it, curse when angry, sleep when tired, and decide within the limits of ordinary life where his own body would be at any given hour. Then the uniform went on. That is the moment I want you to notice, not because the uniform magically changed him. It did not. Under the wool tunic there was still the same skin, the same bad habits, the same worries, the same private jokes, the same memories of home. But the uniform changed what the world was allowed to demand from him. Once he became a soldier, his time was no longer entirely his time. His words were no longer entirely his words. His body was no longer simply his body moving through civilian life. It belonged, in a very real legal and practical sense, to the army's schedule, the army's discipline, the army's needs, and the army's fear of what might happen if one tired young man did the wrong thing at the wrong moment. This is something modern people often miss when we imagine soldiers. We picture courage, fear, mud, noise, and sacrifice. We do not always picture rules. But military life is made of rules the way a trench wall is made of sandbags. One rule alone does not look like much. Stack enough of them together, and suddenly you have a structure that controls where people can stand, what they can see, how they can move, and what happens if the whole thing collapses. In the First World War, that structure was everywhere. It reached from the parade ground to the troop ship, from the French village behind the lines to the trench at midnight, from the officer's clipboard to the folded letter in a soldier's pocket. Start with the ordinary things. A soldier could not simply decide that he was finished for the day and wander into town. He could not miss formation because he had slept badly. He could not leave his assigned place without permission. He could not ignore a command because it seemed foolish. He could not tell his sergeant that he would rather not carry that load today. He could not argue with an officer in the tone he might have used with a boss back home. Under the Articles of War, the legal code governing the US Army at the time, desertion in wartime could be punished by death or by another punishment decided by court-martial. That fact sat behind everything. It did not mean every late soldier faced the worst possible sentence. Of course not. Armies have categories, procedures, degrees of offence, but it did mean that absence was not treated as a casual personal decision. A soldier who walked away was not merely quitting a job, he was breaking the body of the army itself, and armies at war do not forgive that kind of break easily. Now think about what that meant emotionally. Imagine being exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix. Imagine your feet swollen inside boots that never quite dry. Imagine lice in your seams, mud on your hands, the smell of wet wool and men in latrines and cordite. Imagine that for days your world has been reduced to orders shouted over noise. Move there, dig here, stand watch, keep low, mask on. Rifle ready, no light, no talking, no fire, no sleep yet, not there, not now, not you. And then imagine that somewhere in the back of your mind there is a civilian memory of leaving places, leaving a bad job, leaving a room, walking away from a conversation, going outside to cool off. That freedom, one of the most basic freedoms a person can have, had been taken from you, not accidentally, not cruelly in every case, but completely enough that you could feel the outline of it every time you wanted to go somewhere and could not. The army also cared about what a soldier said. This may sound obvious when we think of battlefield secrets, but in World War I, the anxiety around information became enormous. American soldiers wrote letters constantly, because letters were often the only thread connecting them to home. A letter could tell a mother that her son was alive. It could tell a wife that her husband was still thinking of the garden, the baby, the unpaid bill, the kitchen stove that needed repair. It could carry jokes, complaints, tenderness, boredom, fear. But it could not carry everything. The American Expeditionary Forces used censorship to prevent sensitive information from reaching the enemy, and letters were read, marked, and sometimes cut or withheld. The Library of Congress notes that AEF letters home were a crucial way for soldiers to reassure families and describe daily life, but censorship and self-censorship shaped what those letters could say. Sit with that for a moment. A man could be lonely enough to ache, scared enough to shake after the shelling stopped, homesick enough that the sight of another soldier opening mail could ruin his whole afternoon, and still he had to control himself on the page. He could not write, "We are moving to this exact sector tomorrow." He could not describe certain positions, dates, routes, numbers, weaknesses, rumours, or plans. He could not fully tell the truth if the truth helped the wrong reader, and because every letter passed through other hands, even his private voice became a guarded thing. The soldier might begin naturally enough. "Dear Mother, I am well and hope this finds you the same." Then he would stop because what could he say next? That he was cold, that was allowed. That the food was poor, maybe, depending on how sharply he said it. That the shells had come in all night and one man from his company had lost his nerve. Dangerous. That they were near a certain road, a certain town, a certain wood. Better not. That he was afraid. Perhaps he could say it indirectly. Perhaps he could not say it at all. There is something very human about forbidden speech. Tell someone they cannot say a thing, and the thing does not disappear. It presses harder against the inside of the mouth. For soldiers, censorship did not only protect military information, it shaped memory while memory was still being made. It encouraged men to turn horror into acceptable sentences. It taught them to write around the hole, "I am getting along fine. The weather has been wet. We are seeing some country. Do not worry. I received the socks. Tell everyone hello." Beneath those lines, whole nights could be hiding. Then there were the forbidden comforts. This is where the topic becomes more complicated than a simple story of discipline. The army did not only worry that men would run away or reveal secrets, it worried that they would drink, gamble, visit prostitutes, contract venereal disease, fight civilians, embarrass the United States, ruin morale, weaken the force, or return home as evidence that war had corrupted them. The First World War American soldier was not just being trained to fight, he was being watched as a moral project. Progressive era reformers, military officers, religious organisations, medical authorities and government agencies all looked at the young men in uniform and saw both a fighting force and a population that had to be controlled. That meant a soldier overseas might find himself in a French town where wine was ordinary, where cafes were part of daily life, where brothels existed openly in ways that shocked many Americans, and where the army's rules pushed against local custom. To the French, wine at a meal was not always scandalous. To many American reformers, alcohol was a threat to discipline, health, and national character. The result was a strange kind of tension. The soldier had crossed an ocean to fight in one of the largest wars in human history, but someone was still trying to keep him out of the wrong doorway on a Saturday night. Organisations like the YMCA offered supervised recreation for troops as an alternative to cafes and brothels, part of a larger attempt to provide what reformers considered wholesome amusement near the army. It is easy to smile at that from a distance. You can almost picture it. A young man has survived basic training, seasickness, French mud, bad coffee, and the possibility of artillery fire, and somewhere behind the lines a well-meaning official is worried he might find a bottle, a card game, or a woman. But that smile fades a little when you understand the scale of the army's concern. Venereal disease was not a minor embarrassment in military planning. It could remove soldiers from duty, fill hospitals, and weaken units that needed every able body. American authorities used inspections, reporting requirements, and punishment to control it. Soldiers who exposed themselves to infection were required to report for prophylactic treatment, and the American military's approach included penalties for men who became infected. So even intimacy, even desire, even the impulsive decisions men make when they are lonely and frightened and far from home, became part of the machinery of discipline. This is one of the things that makes the subject so revealing. The Army's forbidden list was not random. Every prohibition pointed to a fear. Do not desert, because the Army fears collapse. Do not reveal information, because the Army fears the enemy listening. Do not drink, because the Army fears disorder. Do not visit prostitutes, because the army fears disease and moral scandal. Do not gamble, because the army fears debt, fights, resentment, and distraction. Do not light a cigarette at night near the front, because the army fears a sniper seeing the flame. Do not remove your gas mask too soon, because the army fears men dying from invisible poison after deciding with fatal confidence that the danger has passed. Do not loot, because the army fears indiscipline, revenge, diplomatic shame, and the breakdown of the line between soldier and marauder. Do not sleep on guard, because the army fears the few seconds in which an entire position can be lost. One by one, these rules form a portrait of the war itself. The First World War was not only mud and trenches, it was paperwork and punishment. It was lectures and inspections. It was passes, patrols, curfews, salutes, sentries, censored envelopes, medical examinations, military police, guard duty, and the constant pressure of being told that one careless act could harm more than yourself. A soldier might resent these rules. Many did. He might mock them, dodge them, break them when he thought no one was watching. Soldiers have always had a talent for finding the gap between regulation and reality. But even when the rules were broken, they mattered, because breaking a rule is not the same as being free of it. The rule still defines the risk. It still tells you what the army thinks you're capable of doing wrong. Let us bring this closer. Imagine it's evening behind the lines in France. Not the front trench yet, not the worst place, but close enough that the war is never absent. The road is broken by wagon wheels and shells. Trucks pass with their lamps hooded. A military policeman stands near a crossing, watching men come and go. Somewhere there is a canteen with coffee, cigarettes, maybe chocolate if supplies have reached it. Somewhere else there is a cafe the men have been warned about, or a street that is out of bounds, or a house everyone knows about but no one is supposed to visit. A soldier has a few hours before he must return. He's tired in his bones. He has money in his pocket for the first time in weeks. He has not spoken to a woman who is not a nurse, a worker, or an old villager in longer than he cares to admit. He wants to drink something stronger than coffee. He wants to hear music. He wants to feel, briefly, like the war has loosened its grip. And standing between him and that small escape is a rule. Not always a guard, not always a locked door. Sometimes just the knowledge that he can be caught, that his pass can be checked, that his company commander can hear of it, that a medical inspection can reveal what he did, that a fight can become a charge, that a night of pleasure can become loss of pay, confinement, hard labour, shame before the unit, or worse. In civilian life, a bad decision may remain private. In the army, a bad decision often becomes public property. It goes into a report. It becomes a lesson. It becomes a warning to other men standing in formation the next morning. There is another kind of forbidden act that seems small until you imagine the battlefield around it. Light, a match, a cigarette, a lantern uncovered for too long. Today light feels harmless. We spend it without thinking. A screen brightens in a dark room and no one dives to the floor. A porch light clicks on and no artillery answers. But near the front in World War I, light could be a signal you never meant to send. A match flame could reveal a position. A glowing cigarette could give a sniper a point in the dark. A careless lamp could draw fire. So men were told when they could smoke, where they could smoke, how to shield a light, when to keep silent, when to move, when to freeze. Night was not rest. Night was a discipline of the body. Keep your head down. Keep your voice low. Keep the rifle near. Do not cough loudly if you can help it. Do not show a light. Do not step where the wire might catch you. Do not assume the dark belongs only to you. The rules around gas had their own terror. Poison gas made the air itself suspicious. It created a kind of fear no ordinary courage could fully answer, because the danger might arrive without a visible enemy. A man could hate his gas mask. Many did. It was hot, awkward, claustrophobic, and miserable to wear for long periods. It made breathing feel like work. It made voices strange. It turned the face into something insect-like and anonymous. But when the alarm came, the rule was immediate. Mask on. Keep it on. Do not remove it because you are uncomfortable. Do not remove it because another man says it is clear. Do not remove it because panic makes you desperate for fresh air. That rule was not about neatness or obedience for its own sake. It was about survival. The mask might feel unbearable, but the air outside it might be worse. What I find most striking is that so many of these rules were designed for moments when a man would least want to obey them. Nobody needed much discipline to follow a rule that matched his comfort. The real test came when the rule pressed against hunger, fear, loneliness, pain, curiosity, pride, boredom, or exhaustion. Do not leave your post when every part of you wants to step away. Do not sleep when your body is begging for it. Do not take off the mask when your lungs feel trapped. Do not run when the shelling begins. Do not write the full truth when the truth is the only thing you want to send home. Do not drink when drink is available and your nerves are raw. Do not speak when anger rises. Do not strike the match. Do not pocket the souvenir. Do not go down that street. Do not answer the insult. Do not decide for yourself. That may be the centre of this whole story. A soldier's life in World War I was not only dangerous because men were trying to kill him, it was dangerous because the war constantly created situations in which ordinary human instincts became liabilities. Curiosity could get you shot. Warmth could show the enemy where you were. Homesickness could make you write too much. Desire could put you in a hospital. Thirst could lead to punishment. Fatigue could become a crime. Fear could become disgrace. Anger could become insubordination. A souvenir could become looting. A shortcut could become absence without leave. The army's rules were harsh because the conditions were harsh, and because the institution did not trust individual men to carry the whole weight of consequence alone. That does not mean the army was always wise. It was not. It could be rigid, unfair, moralizing, and blind to suffering. It could punish men for failures that came from exhaustion or trauma. It could treat fear as a disciplinary problem when sometimes fear was simply the mind recognizing reality. It could demand silence from men who needed to speak, cleanliness from men living in filth, obedience from men being asked to walk into machine gun fire, and moral restraint from men placed under pressures most civilians would never experience. But if we are going to understand the world of the American doughboy, we have to understand that he lived inside this contradiction. He was trusted with a rifle, sometimes a bayonet, sometimes the lives of the men beside him, but he was not trusted with a candle flame at the wrong hour. He was asked to be brave but not independent, strong but not uncontrolled, loyal but not too honest in his letters, human but only within regulations. Now picture that same soldier again, the one we left standing in line at camp. The first time he hears the rules, maybe he half listens. Men are like that when instructions pile up. He shifts his weight. His collar itches. Someone nearby mutters a joke. The officer's voice carries across the formation. There will be penalties for absence. There will be inspections. There will be rules on passes. There will be censorship of mail. There will be conduct expected of every man wearing the uniform of the United States. The soldier may not yet understand how much of his life is being described. He may think the real war will begin later, when he reaches France, when he hears artillery, when he sees the trenches. But in a quieter way, the war has already begun. It has entered his daily habits. It has told him when to wake, where to stand, what to pack, how to speak, what to hide, and what kind of man the army expects him to become. And when he finally does reach France, when he steps off the transport into a country already worn down by years of war, the rules come with him. They travel in his paybook, in the posted orders, in the guard reports, in the eyes of officers, in the bark of sergeants, in the censor's stamp on his envelope, in the military policeman at the corner, in the gas mask bag against his chest, in the knowledge that the wrong choice at the wrong time can follow him farther than he ever meant to go. So tonight, As we begin moving through these forbidden parts of a soldier's life, try not to think of them as a simple list of army discipline. Think of them as doors that were closed one by one around millions of young men. Some doors were closed for good reasons. Some were closed out of fear. Some were closed because armies are not built to understand every private need of the people inside them. Behind each closed door there is a story, a letter that could not be written honestly, a road a soldier could not take, a glass he was not supposed to drink, a woman he was warned not to visit, a patch he could not strike, a helmet he could not remove, a mask he had to keep on while every instinct told him to tear it away, a command he had to obey even when obedience meant walking toward the sound every animal part of him wanted to flee. The first of those doors is one of the quietest. It does not open onto a battlefield. It opens onto a piece of paper, folded carefully, handled by a young man who has mud under his nails and someone waiting for him thousands of miles away. He wants to tell the truth. He wants to say where he is. He wants to explain what he has seen. He wants, maybe more than anything, to be known by the people who love him. But the army is there too, looking over his shoulder, reading before the letter can leave his hands, deciding which parts of a soldier's heart are safe enough to send home. The first thing to understand about a soldier's letter in World War I is that it was not really alone with him. It looked private. It felt private while he was writing it. It may have been written with a pencil worn down almost to the wood, on YMCA stationery, on army paper, on whatever scrap could be found in a billet or dugout or tent. It might have begun in the most ordinary way imaginable. Dear mother, dear father, my darling wife. Just a few lines to let you know I am well. But before that letter could cross the ocean, before it could reach a farmhouse in Iowa, or an apartment in Brooklyn, or a kitchen table in Ohio, it had to pass through other eyes. It belonged first to the soldier, then to the army, and only after that, if the army approved, to the person he loved. That is a strange thing to sit with. A man could be thousands of miles from home, standing in a war that was too large for any one person to fully understand, and the one thing he wanted most was to explain himself. He wanted to say, I am alive. He wanted to say, I am tired. He wanted to say, I saw something today I will never forget. He wanted to say, please do not worry, even when worry was the correct response, and just when his own voice was most necessary, it had rules placed around it. The American Expeditionary Forces did not treat mail as a small matter. Letters were morale, connection, evidence of survival, and a possible military risk all at once. The Library of Congress notes that letters home gave AEF soldiers a way to tell families they were safe and describe pieces of daily life, but censors removed exact locations, future troop movements, and sometimes descriptions of the grim realities of war. Soldiers also learned to self-censor, using vague headings like somewhere in France, instead of naming where they were. Picture a young doughboy sitting on an upturned crate in a barn outside a French village. It is late afternoon. The village is not the kind of France he imagined before he arrived. It is not Paris. It is not boulevards and bright cafes and people strolling under trees. It is stone walls, manure, damp straw, children watching the Americans with guarded curiosity, and old women in black moving through streets that have already seen too many uniforms. The soldier's boots are muddy. His hands are cold. He has been told that mail will go out soon, and this may be his last chance for several days to write. So he folds one knee under him, balances the paper against a mess kit or a plank, and begins. He wants to write the name of the town. That is the first thing. It is natural. Anyone writing a letter begins by locating himself. We do it without thinking. We say where we are because being somewhere is part of being real. But he has been warned. Exact locations are not to be written. He cannot tell his family the village name. He cannot describe the nearby road in a way that would identify it. He cannot say how close he is to the line, or where his unit is going next, or when they are expected to move. Even a detail that feels harmless to him might be useful if the letter falls into the wrong hands. A railway stop, a bridge, a cathedral, the direction of a march, the name of a neighbouring town, the unit beside his own. The army saw a map hidden inside ordinary sentences, so he writes, somewhere in France. Those 3 words appear again and again in letters from the war, somewhere in France. They are simple, almost flat, but there is a whole emotional problem inside them. Somewhere in France means I know where I am, but I cannot tell you. Somewhere in France means the army's reading this before you do. Somewhere in France means there is a line between my life and your knowledge of my life, and I am not the one who drew it. To the mother receiving the letter, those words may have been comforting because they meant her son was alive. But they were also maddening. Somewhere in France is a very large place when your child is in danger. Now imagine the soldier writing the next sentence. He wants to say that his company is moving tomorrow. He wants to say they have been issued extra ammunition. He wants to say the men are quiet in a way that tells him something is coming. He wants to say the officers have been studying maps all day. He wants to say rumours are running through the unit and no one knows which ones to believe. But he cannot. Future movements were exactly the kind of thing censors watched for. A careless letter could reveal timing, destination, strength, or intention. The soldier did not need to understand the whole intelligence picture to be dangerous. He only needed to put down one useful piece of it. That is what makes wartime censorship so unsettling at the human level. It did not require a soldier to be disloyal. It assumed that loyalty was not enough. A loyal man could still be lonely. A careful man could still be tired. A homesick man could write too much because the person on the other end of the letter felt safer than the war around him. The censorship system existed because armies knew that people reveal themselves most when they think they are speaking to love. The rules also reached into descriptions of battle. A soldier could not freely tell his family what had happened in the full way he remembered it. He might mention that things had been lively, or that the boys had been busy, or that he had been through some rough times. But the vivid parts were harder to send. The dead horse in the road, the man crying for water, the shell burst that changed the shape of a face, the smell after several days of rain, the nervous collapse of someone who had seemed cheerful that morning, the way the ground shook under a bombardment, not like thunder exactly, but like the earth itself was losing patience. These things were not always military secrets in the narrow sense, but they could damage morale at home. They could make the war look less clean, less purposeful, less manageable. Censorship was not only about keeping information away from Germany, it was also about controlling what families in America were allowed to imagine. That does not mean every censor was heartless. Many censors were officers who had been close enough to the same conditions to understand what the men were trying to say. Some probably disliked the job. Some probably did it with care. Some may have looked away from a sentence that was technically too honest but harmless enough to pass. Others were stricter. The system mattered more than the personality of any one man. The soldier knew that the letter might be opened. He knew words might be crossed out with ink. He knew a section might be cut away, leaving a literal hole in the page. The Library of Congress gives examples of soldiers' letters where specific details were blacked out, erased, or removed, and one soldier's heading of "somewhere in Belgium" was partially scratched through because even that was considered too revealing. Think about receiving a letter like that. Your son's handwriting is there. His hand touched the paper. You can see the pressure of the pencil. You can see where he paused. Then, in the middle of the sentence, there is a black bar, or a blank space, or a cut-out section. The absence becomes part of the message. The censor has taken something, but he has also revealed that there was something to take. That may have been worse than never knowing. A mother could stare at the missing line and fill it with every fear she'd been trying to keep away. Was it a place? Was it a wound? Was it a death? Was it something he saw? Was it something he was about to do? A hole in a letter is not empty when the reader is afraid. For the soldier, the possibility of censorship changed the act of writing before the censor ever touched the page. This is called self-censorship, but that phrase sounds too clean for what it was. It was the habit of stopping your own hand. It was the little silence before a sentence. It was deciding that a truth would cause more trouble than it was worth. It was writing, "I am fine," because anything more exact would be complicated. It was reducing a terrible week to, "We have been having quite a time." It was telling your sister that France has many old buildings while not telling her that one of them was being used as a dressing station. It was telling your father that the army feeds you well enough while not saying you would give almost anything for a real meal at home. Most AEF soldiers learned to do this. The Library of Congress observed that many World War I correspondence collections show not dramatic blackouts on every page, but censor approvals and careful phrasing from men who already knew what not to write. That detail is important because it tells us the army did not need to physically remove every forbidden word. Once the rules entered the soldier's mind, he carried the censor with him. He became, in a sense, the first person to cut his own letter. There were practical layers to this system. The United States created a formal censorship apparatus during the war. In October 1917, a censorship board made up of the Post Office Department, the War and Navy Departments, the War Trade Board, and the Committee on Public Information was formed to regulate international mail, cable, radio, telegraph, and telephone communication, with past items stamped to show approval. For the American soldier overseas, the control could be especially strict. One international encyclopedia of the First World War describes US Army soldier letters as subject to a very stringent system, with letters controlled by company, regimental and base censors. It also notes that special family correspondence in blue envelopes allowed once weekly, and foreign language letters were read by the base censor. The blue envelope is one of those small historical details that tells you more than it seems to. It sounds almost gentle, does it not? A blue envelope. Something private, set apart, maybe safer for a man writing to his wife or mother. But it was not freedom. It was only a different channel of control. The idea was that a soldier could write a more personal letter without having it read by his immediate officer, which mattered, because a man might not want his own company commander reading about family problems, money trouble, fear, homesickness, or shame. But the letter still went to a censor. It still did not belong entirely to him. Privacy in wartime was rationed, and even the kinder version of it had an official hand on the seal. Foreign language letters created another problem. The American army was full of men from immigrant families, men who spoke German, Italian, Polish, Yiddish, Czech, Slovak, Hungarian, Greek, Spanish, and other languages at home. Some could write English easily, some could not. Some may have felt that English was for the army, but their mother's language was for their mother. That is a very human distinction. A man might know enough English to drill, curse, joke, and obey commands. But when he wanted to write tenderness, he reached for the language of childhood. The army, however, could not pass what it could not understand. A foreign language letter was not automatically disloyal, but it was automatically suspicious enough to require someone who could read it. So another intimate part of identity became entangled with censorship. Even the language a man used to say "I miss you" could become a military concern. The restrictions did not stop with letters. A soldier was also limited in what he could send physically. Photographs could be sensitive. Maps were dangerous. Sketches of positions, roads, bridges, trenches, artillery placements, or nearby villages could reveal far more than the soldier intended. Diaries could create risk if captured, especially if they contained locations, dates, unit movements, or names. A man might want to keep a record for himself, but the front was not a safe place for complete records. The Library of Congress notes that some soldiers used diaries for detailed notes about locations, but even diaries rarely included valuable military information, because if the wrong person found them, they could help the enemy. That must have created a strange relationship with memory. The soldier wanted to remember, but the army needed him not to write too much down. He wanted to preserve his own life from disappearing into mud and orders, but the conditions of war made preservation risky. A diary could comfort him at night, giving shape to days that otherwise blurred together. Yet the very act of recording a place could become a problem, so memory had to live in his head, where it could not be censored but could also decay, distort, or become too heavy to carry. There is another kind of forbidden speech that did not always appear in neat lists of rules, but it mattered deeply. A soldier was not supposed to write in a way that weakened morale. He was not supposed to spread defeatism. He was not supposed to tell people back home that the war was hopeless, that officers were incompetent, that the army was falling apart, or that the men no longer believed in the cause. Some complaints passed. Soldiers have always complained, and no army has ever fully stopped them. But there was a difference between ordinary grumbling and language that sounded dangerous. The authorities were alert to subversive ideas and morale problems. Wartime postal control in many armies was meant not only to catch military secrets, but to test soldier morale and detect subversive thoughts. This is where the letter becomes more than a message. It becomes an instrument for measuring the emotional temperature of an army. Censors were not only asking, did this man reveal a location? They were also asking, what does this man believe? Is he angry? Is he frightened? Is he spreading despair? Does he trust the command? Does his family at home need reassurance? Or is he sending them panic? When enough letters pass through enough hands, private grief starts to look like data. That sounds cold, and in many ways it was. But armies are cold institutions because they must think in numbers. One man writing that he is miserable is a personal tragedy. 10,000 men writing that they are miserable is a military problem. A soldier might think he's only telling his wife that morale is low in his unit. A censor might see the same sentence and imagine newspapers, rumours, political pressure, worried parents, angry voters, and enemy propagandists. The private sentence and the public consequence were tied together in ways the soldier could not control. There were also things a doughboy was discouraged from saying because of the emotional burden they placed on the reader. Many men softened their letters, not because an officer forced them to, but because they loved the people at home. This is important. Not every silence was imposed from above. Some silences were gifts, or at least attempts at gifts. A soldier might choose not to tell his mother that he had been sick. He might choose not to describe the sound of the wounded men. He might tell his wife he was sleeping well because he knew she was raising children alone and already anxious. He might joke about French mud rather than mention the friend who had been buried in it. He might write cheerful nonsense because cheerfulness was the only thing he could still send in full. There is something deeply moving about that. We often think truth is the highest form of intimacy, and sometimes it is. But during war, men often protected intimacy by limiting truth. They created a version of themselves that could travel safely home. Not false exactly, but edited. A survivable version. A son who was tired but fine. A husband who missed you but was managing. A brother who had seen a lot but still had his sense of humour. The real man may have been sitting in a freezing dugout with shaking hands. The man in the letter was steady enough for the family mantelpiece. A common sentence in wartime correspondence was some variation of, "Do not worry about me." That sentence should be treated with caution whenever we read it. It almost never means there is nothing to worry about. It usually means the writer knows worry is already present and is trying to manage it from far away. "Do not worry about me" could mean I've just come through shell fire. It could mean I have not received your letters and am pretending not to be hurt. It could mean the food is bad, the lice are worse, and I have no idea what tomorrow will bring. It could mean I need you to sleep tonight, because I cannot. So what was a soldier allowed to say? More than we might assume. He could describe certain daily routines. He could write about weather, food, mud, rest billets, French children, old churches if he kept them vague, the kindness of civilians, the strangeness of foreign money, the difficulty of the language, the pleasure of receiving parcels, the hunger for newspapers from home. He could ask about crops, babies, debts, illnesses, neighbours, church, school, the family dog. He could tease his siblings. He could request socks. Socks mattered. He could thank someone for tobacco or candy. He could describe boredom, because war contained enormous amounts of boredom. He could say he had been busy. He could say he was seeing interesting things. He could say that military life was making him stronger, whether he believed it or not. These permitted details are why letters are so valuable to historians even when they are incomplete. They show the shape of ordinary life under extraordinary pressure. They reveal what men thought safe to mention, what families wanted to hear, what emotional roles letters were expected to perform. A letter that says very little about combat may say a great deal about restraint. A cheerful note may not prove cheerfulness. A blank space may speak loudly. A repeated phrase may show not laziness but caution. Somewhere in France is not a lack of information. It is evidence of the war reaching into the sentence. The receiving side mattered too. At home, families learned how to read around censorship. They looked at dates. They watched for delays. They compared letters with news reports. They noticed changes in handwriting, length, tone and frequency. A mother might know something was wrong not because her son said it, but because he suddenly said less. A wife might understand that a joke was being used as a curtain. A father might read the line, "We're all in good spirits," and know enough about men to doubt it. The home front became skilled at interpreting fragments. In that sense, censorship did not prevent meaning. It changed where meaning hid. Mail delays added another kind of cruelty. A letter from France might arrive weeks after it was written. By the time a family read, "I am safe and well," the soldier might already be in a different sector, wounded, missing, or dead. The sentence was true when written, but time could make it uncertain. Families knew this. Soldiers knew it too. That knowledge sits behind even the simplest letter. Every message from the front was a report from the past pretending to be present. And still they wrote. That is the part I keep coming back to. Despite censorship, despite delay, despite the risk of saying too much or too little, men wrote. They wrote in dugouts, hospitals, barns, camps, troop ships and training fields. They wrote because the act itself mattered. A letter did not have to tell everything to keep a relationship alive. It only had to carry enough of the person to be recognised. The handwriting, the joke, the familiar greeting, the way he signed his name. These things crossed the gap that fact could not cross. For some men, writing was also a way of remaining civilian somewhere inside the uniform. The army could order his body, censor his words, and number his unit. But when he wrote Dear Nellie or Dear Ma, he stepped for a moment into an older self. The son, the husband, the brother. The boy who used to sit at that table. The man who remembered the orchard, the shop, the streetcar line, the smell of his own bedclothes, the sound of someone calling him by a nickname no sergeant would ever use. Censorship could limit what he said from that self. It could not entirely erase the self that was speaking. That may be why the forbidden parts mattered so much. The army did not forbid meaningless things. It forbade the details that connected the soldier's private life to the war's dangerous machinery. Where are you? I cannot say. Where are you going? I cannot say. What happened today? Not fully. Are you afraid? Not in those words. Is it as bad as the papers suggest? Worse, perhaps. But I will write that the weather is damp. Do you miss us? Yes, that I can say. I miss you more than I can tell. And even that phrase, more than I can tell, carried a truth larger than romance. There really was more than he could tell. Let us return to the barn outside the French village. The soldier has nearly filled the page. The pencil has smudged along the side of his hand. Someone nearby is laughing too loudly at a joke that is not very funny. Another man is asleep with his mouth open, still wearing his boots. A corporal says mail is being collected. The soldier reads over what he has written. He sees the places where he nearly said too much. He changes one sentence. He crosses out a town name before anyone else can. He takes out a rumour. He makes the bad week smaller. He adds that he received the package. He says the socks were useful. He asks after everyone. He says not to worry. He signs it with love. Then the letter leaves him. That is the moment that feels small but is not. Once it leaves his hands, it enters the army system. It may be read by someone who knows him. It may be stamped. It may be delayed. It may be marked. It may cross the Atlantic in a mail sack among thousands of other carefully edited lives. And eventually, if luck holds, someone at home will open it under a lamp and touch the page where his hand once rested. The family will read what he was allowed to say. They will guess at what he was not. They may read the letter aloud, or keep it private, or fold it back into its envelope and place it in a drawer with others. This soldier's words will sit there safely in America while he remains somewhere in France, still unable to say exactly where, still moving under orders, still learning that in the army, even silence has regulations. And the restrictions on his words were only one part of the larger cage, because a soldier who could not freely tell his family where he was also could not freely decide where his own feet would go. The same army that watched his sentences watched his body. It counted him at roll call, assigned him to billets, issued passes, denied passes, posted guards, punished absence, and treated movement without permission as something far more serious than a young man wandering off for air. For the doughboy, being unable to say where he was soon connected to something even harder. He was often unable to leave the place he was in at all. And once the letter was folded, once the words had been made safe enough to travel, the soldier was still exactly where the army had placed him. That is the thing that feels so simple from a distance and so heavy when you try to imagine it clearly. He could write somewhere in France, but he could not decide that somewhere was no longer bearable. He could not look at the mud, the wire, the broken trees, the duckboards slick under his boots, the smell of latrines and damp wool and old shell holes, and simply say, "I have had enough. I am going home." In civilian life, walking away is sometimes rude, sometimes cowardly, sometimes wise, sometimes necessary. In the army in wartime, walking away was a crime that could pull the whole weight of military law down onto one man. Let us sit with that difference for a moment, because it is easy to say the word desertion and make it sound clean. It becomes a legal category, a charge, a line in a record. But before it was that, it was a human motion, a foot placed outside the place where it was supposed to remain. A man stepping out of a trench, off a road, away from a formation, away from a billet, away from a unit that had counted him as present that morning. It might begin with panic. It might begin with calculation. It might begin with a soldier telling himself he only needed an hour alone. It might begin with a missed roll call, a lost pass, a wrong turn in a country where the roads all looked unfamiliar and the signs were in another language. It might begin with a man so tired that the idea of taking one more order felt impossible. But the army could not afford to treat each of those beginnings as private. The American soldier in World War I belonged to a system built on location. That sounds plain, but it is the centre of it. The army had to know where he was. At reveille, at drill, on fatigue duty, in a troop train, on a transport ship, in a rest camp, in a replacement depot, in a support trench, in the front line, on sentry post, moving up through a communication trench, moving back after relief, waiting near a road for rations or ammunition. His location was not just his own business. It was part of the unit's strength. If a platoon was supposed to have 40 men available and one man was missing, that absence had meaning. If several men were missing, it had more meaning. If enough men left, the unit was no longer the thing the commander believed he had. A company on paper could look ready, while a company in reality had holes in it. War punishes that kind of mistake quickly. This is why a soldier could not simply walk away from the line. Not because officers lacked imagination, not because they did not know men were afraid. Many officers were afraid too. The reason was more basic. The line was not only a place. It was a chain of dependence. One man watched while another slept. One man carried ammunition while another fired. One man kept his rifle pointed into the dark while the man beside him tried to heat coffee over a tiny smokeless flame. One runner carried a message because the telephone wire had been cut by shell fire. One stretcher bearer needed another man to help lift the wounded. One sentry stayed awake because everyone behind him was trusting that he would not decide just this once to sit down and close his eyes. The army treated leaving as dangerous because it was dangerous. A single absence could be small. A pattern of absence could become collapse. Under the Articles of War in force for the US Army during this period, desertion in wartime could be punished by death or by another punishment decided by court-martial, and a sentinel who slept on post or left before being properly relieved also faced death or another court-martial punishment in wartime. That does not mean every man who vanished for a few hours was marched out and shot. The American Army did not execute its World War I deserters. From April 6, 1917, through December 31, 1918, the AEF charged 5,584 soldiers with desertion, convicted 2,657, sentenced 24 to death, and executed none. But the fact that the law allowed the extreme sentence mattered. It sat behind the ordinary punishments like a locked room everyone knew existed. Even when it was not used, it shaped the fear around the charge. Now, it is important to separate a few things that people often blur together. Absence without leave was not always the same as desertion. A man could be absent from his appointed place without permission and still intend to return. He might overstay a pass. He might miss a train. He might get drunk in a town behind the lines and fail to report on time. He might be found miles from his unit without a proper explanation. Desertion required something heavier: the intention to abandon the service, or to avoid hazardous duty, or to remain away permanently. But in the lived experience of the soldier, that distinction may not have felt comforting. A missing man was still a missing man, and the first questions were not gentle ones. Where were you? Who gave you permission? Why did you not report? Who saw you leave? Did you know your unit was moving? Were you trying to avoid the front? Imagine a soldier standing before an officer trying to explain himself. His cap is in his hands. His face is dirty. He may have a real story. He got separated in the dark during relief. He followed the wrong group of men down a trench. He twisted an ankle and fell behind. He went looking for water. He was carrying a message and could not find headquarters. Or perhaps the story is weaker. He had a pass and stayed too long. He met someone in a village. He drank more than he meant to. He heard his unit was going forward and found himself walking in the opposite direction before he could explain even to himself what he was doing. Military law did not care only about what happened. It cared about what the action meant, and meaning in wartime could be argued over with a man's entire future at stake. The line itself made walking away both tempting and nearly impossible. The Western Front was not a single neat trench with men standing in a row. By the time American troops arrived in serious numbers, the front had developed into zones: forward positions, support trenches, reserve lines, dugouts, command posts, artillery areas, roads, railheads, aid stations, supply dumps, villages, and rear camps. There were paths a soldier was allowed to use and paths he was not. There were times when movement was permitted and times when movement could draw fire. A man could not just stroll away as if leaving a factory floor. To get out, he had to pass through geography controlled by the army and watched by the enemy. Communication trenches could be crowded, damaged, flooded, or under observation. Roads were patrolled. Military police watched towns, rail stations, bridges, and crossroads. Units took roll. Passes were checked. Stragglers drew attention. A lone soldier going the wrong way asked to be noticed. And yet some men tried. Of course they did. Every army in every war has had men who tried. The surprise is not that desertion existed. The surprise may be that there was not more of it, considering what men were asked to endure. The American expeditionary forces had relatively low desertion levels during the war compared with the earlier periods in US military history, according to the First World War Encyclopedia's summary of American soldier attitudes. That matters because it corrects a lazy assumption. The men were not constantly running. Most stayed, most obeyed. Most kept going, not because they were never afraid, but because fear alone did not decide the matter. So what kept them there? Law was one reason, but not the only one. Punishment mattered. Courts-martial mattered. Loss of pay, confinement, hard labour, dishonourable discharge, public shame, and the possibility of a death sentence mattered. But soldiers were not held in place only by threats from above. They were also held by each other. A man might hate an officer and still refuse to abandon the men in his squad. He might curse the army and still know that if he left his post, another man would have to cover it. He might not speak in grand phrases about patriotism. Many soldiers did not. But he understood the small morality of the group. You did not leave your friends to carry your load. You did not disappear before a move and let someone else answer for you. You did not make the man beside you wonder whether you would be there when the barrage lifted. That kind of loyalty could be stronger than official language. The army might call it duty. The men might call it not letting the boys down. In a trench, that difference mattered less than you might think. A soldier did not always fight for a flag in the abstract. He often endured for the men whose names he knew, whose habits irritated him, whose letters he had heard read aloud, whose coughing kept him awake, whose hands helped pull him out of shell holes, whose jokes made miserable food easier to swallow. Walking away from the line was not only walking away from danger, it could be walking away from them. Still, there were moments when even that was not enough. The front placed the human nervous system under pressure it had not been built to withstand. Shellfire was not like ordinary fear. It could last for hours. It could remove sleep. It could make the ground unreliable. It could kill without showing the killer. A man could not reason with artillery. He could not shoot back at the shell that was already falling. He could only wait and hope that mathematics chose another body. Men exposed to bombardments sometimes shook, vomited, froze, wept, lost speech, wandered, or broke in ways that armies at the time did not fully understand. The term shell shock was used during the war, but its meaning was contested, and military systems often struggled to distinguish injury, fear, exhaustion, and misconduct. This is where the story becomes morally difficult. A man leaving the line might be a coward. He might be a deserter. He might also be a wounded man whose wound did not look like a wound to the people judging him. The First World War forced armies to confront psychological injury on a vast scale. But discipline had been built for a simpler model. Either a man obeyed or he did not. Either he stayed or he left. Either he stood his post or abandoned it. Military law needed clear categories because battle did not give commanders time for endless explanation. But human beings do not always break along clear legal lines. Picture a soldier after 3 days near the front. He has not slept more than minutes at a time. The lice are constant. The mud has made his feet tender and raw. The last barrage buried 2 men in a section of trench, and digging them out took too long. He keeps hearing one of them after the sound has stopped. Someone says they will be relieved tonight, then the relief is delayed. Someone else says the unit will attack soon. No one confirms it. The soldier looks toward the rear and thinks of a road. He does not form a political argument. He does not decide to betray his country. His mind simply reaches for distance. Distance from the guns. Distance from the smell. Distance from the next order. He begins to move. At that moment, the army's view of him and his own view of himself may split apart. To the army, he is leaving without permission. To himself, he may be surviving. To the men still in the line, he may be abandoning them. To a later historian, he may be evidence of trauma. To his mother, if she ever learns of it, He may be a frightened boy. To a court-martial, he becomes a case, one body, many meanings, and the army could not build discipline around every possible meaning. That is not a defense of every punishment. It is an explanation of the institution's fear. Armies are terrified of contagion, not just disease, but behaviour. One man runs, another sees him, then another calculates. One sentry leaves, another wonders why he should stay. One group of men refuses a movement, and suddenly command becomes negotiation. In trench warfare, where attacks often depended on timing and cohesion, commanders believed that discipline had to be visible, predictable, and severe enough to hold under terror. Military justice across the warring armies was designed primarily to maintain discipline. Achieving individualized justice often came second. That sentence may sound harsh, but it is one of the keys to understanding why walking away was treated with such seriousness. The army was less interested in the private drama of one man than in the example his act might set. That does not mean officers never cared. Some did. A captain who knew his men might understand the difference between a habitual shirker and a good soldier who had reached the end of himself. A doctor might recognise exhaustion. A sergeant might quietly pull a man back before the problem became official. But once a case entered the machinery, the individual story had to compete with the army's need to warn everyone else. The physical design of military life reinforced this. Roll call was not a formality. It was a way of making absence visible. Passes were not scraps of paper. They were temporary permissions to exist outside the usual place. Guard posts were not symbolic. They were points where one man's presence mattered. Relief schedules mattered, because leaving too early could expose others. Movement orders mattered, because units had to reach positions at certain times, often at night, often under fire, often through roads crowded with artillery, wagons, ambulances, and troops moving in both directions. A soldier who missed movement did not merely inconvenience himself. He could lose his unit, miss equipment, fail to appear for battle, and become a problem others had to solve. There is a simple modern comparison, though it is not perfect. Imagine a hospital operating room where each person has an assigned task. One person handles anesthesia, one tracks instruments, one assists the surgeon, one monitors blood pressure. If one person quietly walks away because the room is too intense, the issue is not only that the person broke a workplace rule. The issue is that everyone else's safety depended on a role being filled. Now put that logic under shellfire multiplied across thousands of men, add darkness, fear, mud, poor communication, and the enemy, and you begin to understand why armies treated location as discipline. Behind the lines, the rules could feel almost as confining, though less immediately deadly. A soldier in a rest area might think rest meant freedom. Usually it did not. Rest could mean drill, cleaning equipment, inspections, carrying supplies, repairing roads, bathing under orders, delousing, writing letters, and waiting to be told where to go next. If he wanted to visit a town, he needed permission. If certain streets were placed off limits, he was not allowed there. If his pass expired at a certain hour, he had to return. If the unit was ordered to move, his personal plans vanished. Even away from the front trench, his feet were still governed. This is one of the quiet shocks of military life for civilians. We tend to think the worst part is danger, and danger was certainly the great fact of the war. But the loss of ordinary choice was constant. A soldier could not decide when he was tired enough to stop. He could not decide that rain made marching unreasonable. He could not decide that a village looked pleasant and remain there. He could not decide that the next road seemed safer. He could not decide that the rear was where his nerves belonged. The army decided, and he moved or stayed according to that decision. For drafted men especially, this could be a hard transformation. The Selective Service Act brought large numbers of men into military service who had not chosen army life as a profession. They came with civilian habits of self-direction. Some had families, farms, businesses, debts, sweethearts, parents who depended on them. They were not all eager adventurers. Some were patriotic, some were resigned, some were angry. Some were trying to do their duty while privately wishing every day that the duty had fallen to someone else. Once in uniform, however, the distinction between willing and unwilling narrowed. The line did not ask whether a man had volunteered. The order applied to him either way. Now imagine what home represented to such a man. Home was not an idea. It was a place where he had permission to be himself. A chair, a shop, a field, a kitchen, a street corner, a bed. To walk away from the line was often to walk mentally toward home long before any actual road could take him there. That is why desertion was not only a military act, but an emotional one. The deserter was not always seeking comfort in a vague sense. He was seeking a return to the world where his body belonged to him, where he could sleep because he chose to sleep, eat because food was on the table, speak without saluting, walk without a pass, take off his shoes because no sergeant would shout. Close a door and have the door mean privacy. The army had to break that relationship with home without breaking the man completely. It had to teach him that his proper place was now the unit. His home for military purposes was not the farm or town he came from. It was the company roster, the assigned billet, the formation, the trench bay, the squad. This was why discipline reached into small acts. Being present at the appointed time trained the body to understand belonging differently. The army did not wait until battle to teach a man he could not leave. It taught him every morning. That training could be irritating in camp, but at the front it became survival. The soldier who had learned to appear on time, carry what he was assigned, stay with his section, and obey movement orders was more likely to remain useful when things became confused. The soldier who treated every rule as optional became dangerous, not because he was evil, because battle magnifies habits. A small undisciplined act in training can become a fatal act under fire. Even so, men were not machines. They found ways to bend the rules around movement when they could. Some lingered at aid stations, some exaggerated illness, some tried to get assigned to safer duties, some arranged errands that kept them behind the line longer. Some disappeared briefly and returned before the absence became a serious charge. Armies know this too. The record of any war is full of these small evasions, these human negotiations with a system that demands more than people can easily give. Not every attempt to avoid danger became desertion. Sometimes it became a joke, sometimes a reprimand, sometimes a transfer, sometimes a medical case, sometimes nothing at all because everyone was too tired to pursue it. But the line remained the line. At some point the army needed men in place. It needed them in the trench before dawn. It needed them at the jump-off position before an attack. It needed them carrying wire, water, ammunition, stretchers, messages and rations. It needed them standing in mud with their rifles even when nothing happened for hours. It needed them to stay while artillery searched for them. It needed them to wait while fear had time to become detailed. This may be the hardest part to imagine, not the sudden courage of charging, but the slow obedience of remaining. Staying is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is just not moving your feet. Let us return to one man at night. He is in a forward position, and the order has been passed down that no one is to leave until relief arrives. The trench is narrow. Water stands at the bottom. A rat moves somewhere under the duckboards. The parapet is broken in 2 places from shelling earlier in the day. He is hungry, but not sharply hungry anymore, just hollow. His hands smell of metal and mud. The man next to him keeps whispering that the relief should have come by now. No one knows why it has not. The soldier looks back toward the communication trench. Somewhere behind him there is food, maybe coffee, maybe a dry place, maybe nothing more than a deeper trench and another order. But behind is still behind, and behind has begun to feel like life. He cannot go, not unless ordered, not unless wounded, not unless relieved. Not because he is less afraid than the man who runs, but because his fear is contained by rules, by habit, by loyalty, by punishment, by shame, by the presence of others, by the knowledge that if he leaves, the space he occupied does not vanish. Someone else must fill it, or no one does. That empty space is what the army feared. More than the individual footsteps, more than the one man slipping away. The empty space, a missing rifle in the dark, a sentry post unguarded, a unit weaker than reported, a trench bay held by fewer men than the map assumes, a rumour that someone left and got away with it. The line was made of bodies as much as earth and timber. To walk away from it was to remove one piece from a structure already under strain. So when we ask why a soldier could not simply walk away, the answer is not only because he might be punished, it is because the war had turned his presence into a military fact. His body in that place at that hour had value. His absence had consequences. His fear belonged to him, but what he did with it belonged to the army, the men beside him, the officers above him, and the system trying to hold a front across broken land. That is a terrible burden to place on a young man, and millions carried some version of it. And after he had remained, after he had not walked away, after he had done the thing expected of him and come back from the line with his nerves still humming and his clothes sour with trench damp, the army did not suddenly hand him complete freedom. Behind the front there were other temptations waiting. Less dramatic than desertion, but still watched closely, a bottle on a cafe table, a card game in the corner of a billet, a woman at a doorway, a town with streets that looked, for a few hours, like escape. The soldier who could not leave the line without permission also found that rest did not mean release. Even pleasure had rules around it, and the army had very strong opinions about what a doughboy was allowed to do when the guns were finally behind him for the night. And once a soldier came back from the line, if he was lucky enough to come back in one piece, there was a temptation to imagine that the army's grip loosened. The guns were farther away. The trench walls were no longer inches from his shoulders. He might be billeted in a barn, or in a battered French village, or in a camp where the roads had been churned into paste by wagons and boots. He might have a few francs in his pocket, a pass for a few hours, and the sudden, strange feeling that nobody was shooting at him right now. That feeling could be dangerous, not because rest was wrong. Rest was necessary. Men needed food, sleep, clean socks, letters, baths, repairs, laughter, and any small proof that the world still contained something other than mud and orders. But to the army, the hours behind the front were not empty hours. They were hours in which a soldier could be lost in another way. The forbidden comforts behind the line were usually very ordinary human things. A drink, a card game, a woman, a warm room, a song. A table where no one was shouting commands. A street where a young man could walk without ducking his head. These things do not sound like military dangers when you list them plainly. They sound like relief. And that was exactly the problem. Relief is powerful when a man has been under strain. It makes him careless. It makes him spend too quickly, talk too loudly, trust the wrong person, wander too far, stay too late, and mistake a few hours away from the guns for freedom. The American army in World War I feared that almost as much as it feared shells. Not in the same way, of course. A bottle of wine was not a German machine gun. A card table was not a gas attack. A woman in a doorway was not an artillery barrage. But all of them, in the eyes of commanders and reformers, could weaken an army from the rear. A drunk soldier missed formation. A gambling soldier fell into debt or fights. A soldier who visited prostitutes might contract venereal disease and be removed from duty for treatment. A soldier who got into public trouble in a French town embarrassed his unit, his officers, and the United States. The army did not think of these as private vices. It thought of them as leaks in discipline. This is where the rear area becomes more interesting than the simple word rest suggests. Behind the line was not just a place where soldiers recovered. It was a contested space. The men wanted pleasure because they were young, frightened, bored, exhausted, and far from home. The army wanted order because it had to return those men to the line in usable condition. Reformers wanted moral protection because many Americans believed the nation had a duty to return its soldiers home physically healthy and morally clean. Local civilians wanted money, safety, business, and sometimes simply to survive in towns crowded with foreign troops. All of these needs met in the same streets. Picture an American doughboy walking into a French village after a spell near the front. His coat is heavy with damp. His puttees are crusted with mud. His face looks older than it did in training camp. He can hear a piano somewhere, badly played but cheerful enough. There is the smell of tobacco, frying food, horse manure, spilled wine, coal smoke, and wet stone. A cafe door opens and warm air comes out. Inside there are men in uniform, French civilians, maybe British soldiers, maybe a few Americans already leaning too far over their cups. He sees bottles on tables. He hears laughter that has the sharp edge of men trying too hard. For a moment, he's not thinking about policy. He's thinking about warmth. He is thinking about sitting down. But he is not simply a customer. He is a soldier under orders. He may have been told that certain establishments are out of bounds. He may have been told that drinking is restricted. He may have been warned about women, about disease, about military police, about the consequences of disgraceful conduct. He may have heard a lecture back in camp, the kind of lecture soldiers remember mostly because they mocked it afterward. He may have watched a film about sexual hygiene. He may have been handed a pamphlet that spoke to him as if desire could be managed by patriotic sentences. The War Department's Commission on Training Camp Activities worked with the Army during World War I to suppress prostitution, gambling and alcohol near mobilization camps, and it helped close red light districts in places including Alexandria, Louisiana and Honolulu. That fact tells you how serious the government was. It did not see vice around soldiers as something to tolerate with a shrug. It built an entire program around controlling it. The Commission on Training Camp Activities was part of the War Department's attempt to make military camps into places that would produce disciplined, healthy, morally acceptable citizen soldiers, rather than the old stereotype of army camps surrounded by saloons, brothels, crooked amusements, and opportunists waiting for payday. The Commission promoted wholesome recreation, worked with groups like the YMCA, and pushed communities near camps to clean up conditions. It was not only a military project. It was a social reform project wearing a uniform. One War Department account described the suppression of vice and alcohol sales to soldiers near army camps as a problem attacked from many angles, using field agents of the Commission, the Department of Justice, Army Intelligence, local provost guards and reform organisations. The same account listed red light districts closed in numerous American cities near military camps. That is a remarkable thing when you slow down and think about it. A young man joins the army, and suddenly the streets around his camp are being investigated. Police, army authorities, federal agencies, religious and moral reform groups, local officials, women's organisations, social hygiene campaigners, all looking at the same town and asking what has to be removed so the soldier will not be tempted. The soldier himself may not have appreciated the concern. He may have felt treated like a child. Many men did. You can imagine the jokes. A man could be trained to use a bayonet but not trusted near a beer. He could be sent across the Atlantic into shellfire but lectured like a schoolboy about women. He could be told that he was defending civilization and then warned not to enter the wrong alley after dark. There is a kind of absurdity there, and soldiers were very good at noticing absurdity. But beneath it was a real fear, and not a foolish one. Venereal disease was a serious military problem in the First World War. It caused loss of manpower, required treatment that could be expensive and time-consuming, and weakened fighting forces even though it did not usually kill as quickly as battlefield wounds. That last part matters. Before antibiotics, syphilis and gonorrhea were not minor inconveniences. They could be painful, long-lasting, damaging, and difficult to treat reliably. A man infected behind the lines might spend weeks away from his unit. He might require hospital care. He might return ashamed, angry, weakened, or resentful. Commanders saw numbers. Reformers saw sin. Doctors saw infection. The soldier saw something more immediate, desire, loneliness, opportunity, and the possibility of punishment if he came back sick. The Army's policy towards sex during World War I was stricter than some earlier American military practice. The Army University Press summary of Kara Dixon Buick Byers' work notes that before this period, the Army had often taken a more utilitarian view, assuming enlisted soldiers would seek sex and requiring post-intercourse prophylactic treatment. But in World War I, the Army tried to discourage sex itself, and taught soldiers that sexual continence was possible and superior. That was not simply medicine, it was morality joined to military efficiency. The clean soldier was imagined not only as healthy, but as disciplined, patriotic, and worthy of the homes that had sent him. Now think of how strange this became in France. French attitudes toward wine, cafes, and regulated prostitution were not identical to American reform culture. A French village or town behind the lines had its own customs, its own economy, its own exhausted people trying to live with war all around them. The American army arrived with money, manpower, and moral expectations that did not always fit neatly into the world it entered. To many French civilians, a glass of wine with a meal was ordinary. To American dry reformers, alcohol was one of the old enemies. To French authorities, regulated prostitution could be seen as a way to control disease. To many American officials, prostitution itself had to be repressed. The doughboy found himself standing between these worlds. He might be in a country where wine was easier to find than clean drinking water, yet his own army carried the temperance movement in its baggage. He might pass a cafe where French soldiers drank openly, and wonder why the American rules seemed so tight. He might see British or French soldiers behaving in ways that American officers condemned. He might hear that certain houses were medically inspected by local authorities, and still be told by his own command that the entire system was forbidden, dirty, dangerous, and un-American. The war had brought him overseas, but the moral battles of home had followed him there. Alcohol was perhaps the easiest forbidden comfort to understand because drink changes behaviour quickly. A tired man drinks differently from a rested one. A frightened man drinks differently from a cheerful one. A young soldier with back pay in his pocket, surrounded by friends, far from home, and relieved to be alive, may not drink like a careful gentleman sipping at dinner. He may drink fast, loudly, and foolishly. In an army, foolishness spreads. One man sings, another shouts, someone knocks over a table, someone insults a civilian or a soldier from another unit. A fight begins because a joke lands wrong. A patrol arrives, names are taken, passes are inspected. The next morning, what felt like a brief escape becomes a charge sheet. Alcohol also interfered with time, and time was one of the army's sacred things. A soldier on pass had to return when the pass said. He had to be fit for duty. He had to stand formation, march, carry equipment, obey orders, and perhaps go back toward the front sooner than he expected. A hangover was not a private punishment in that world. It could make him slow, careless, insubordinate, or useless when others depended on him. The army did not care that he had earned a little relief. It cared whether he was present and functional when needed. There was also reputation. American officers worried about how their men behaved in front of civilians and allies. A drunk soldier did not merely embarrass himself. He became, in a small public way, America. The United States had entered the war late, with high language about democracy, sacrifice, and moral purpose. It did not want its soldiers known in French towns as rowdy, diseased, drunken boys with too much money and too little restraint. That reputation mattered to commanders because discipline abroad was diplomacy at street level. Every cafe incident, every fight, every unpaid bill, every insult to a civilian woman, every broken window could become a local grievance. Gambling carried a different kind of danger. At first glance, it seems almost harmless compared with shellfire and disease. Men have always played cards in armies. Cards fit easily into pockets. Dice can be thrown on a blanket, a crate, a mess table, a barracks floor. Gambling makes boredom move faster. It gives men something to watch, something to argue about, something to hope for when the next day offers very little. A few coins on a game can make an evening feel alive. But armies dislike uncontrolled debts. A soldier who loses money may borrow. A soldier who borrows may resent. A soldier who wins too much may be hated. Accusations of cheating can turn into fists, knives, stolen property, or lasting bitterness inside a unit that must still fight together. Payday could make the problem worse. A man who had not had much chance to spend money for weeks might suddenly have enough cash to lose badly in one night. Gambling could also attract civilians who understood soldiers as moving wallets. Sharpers, pimps, saloon owners, unofficial guides, women working alone or under pressure from men who controlled them, black market sellers, all could gather near camps and billets because soldiers meant money. That is why the Army and the Commission on Training Camp Activities grouped gambling with alcohol and prostitution. They were not identical sins, but they belonged to the same rear area ecosystem. Each turned a soldier's boredom and pay into opportunity for someone else. Each could pull him outside supervision. Each could create disorder that commanders then had to clean up. The War Department program did not merely tell soldiers to be good. It tried to reshape the environment around them by providing approved recreation, reading rooms, athletics, music, movies, religious services, hostess houses, and canteens. The idea was simple enough. If a young man had somewhere acceptable to go, he might be less likely to go somewhere forbidden. This is where the YMCA hut becomes important. It sounds mild, almost quaint. A hut with stationery, coffee, books, maybe a piano, maybe a lecture, maybe a place to sit and write home. But in the Army's moral geography, it was a counterweight to the cafe, the gambling room, and the brothel. It gave soldiers a supervised place to spend time. The World War I Centennial Commission describes reform efforts and pamphlets aimed at reducing vice and venereal disease in training camps, including materials that urge soldiers to avoid prostitutes and keep their bodies and hearts clean. To the modern ear, that language can sound heavy-handed, even embarrassing, but to the people writing it, the stakes felt national. They believed a soldier's body belonged not only to himself, but to the army, his family, and the future health of the country. There was something deeply uneven in how these policies fell on men and women. Soldiers were warned, lectured, inspected, punished, and treated. Women suspected of prostitution often faced harsher public control, arrest, detention, medical examination, and moral condemnation. The Army's desire to keep soldiers healthy could turn into aggressive policing of civilian women, especially poor women and women who were already vulnerable. The man in uniform was often described as someone to be protected from temptation. The woman near the camp was more likely to be described as the temptation itself. That is an uncomfortable part of the story, but leaving it out would make the history too clean. Behind every official phrase like vice repression were real people. Some women were professional prostitutes, some were occasional sex workers, some were women trying to survive in wartime economies where soldiers had cash and local hardship was everywhere. Some were simply women seen with soldiers and judged by authorities who did not care to make careful distinctions. Some were detained because reformers and officials believed controlling women's bodies was the fastest way to protect men's bodies. The soldier was told not to go to them. The women were often told by force if necessary not to be available. For the doughboy, all of this could feel like another version of the same lesson he had been learning since camp. His desires were not private. His money was not private. His evening was not private. His body, even away from combat, remained a military concern. If he drank and caused trouble, the army cared. If he gambled away his pay, the army cared. If he contracted a venereal disease, the army cared very much. If he entered an out-of-bounds district, overstayed a pass, insulted local civilians, brawled with another soldier, damaged property or returned unfit for duty, the army would translate the night into discipline. Now place him in a billet after the temptation has passed. or perhaps after it has not passed. It is late. He returns with the others through streets where the lamps are dim or hooded, depending on where he is and how close the war feels. Maybe he has obeyed every rule. Maybe he had coffee in a YMCA hut and wrote a letter home under a poster telling him to keep fit. Maybe he attended a show, played cards without money, sang with other men, and went back to his straw in the barn feeling almost peaceful. Or maybe he drank too much and came back loud. Maybe he lost money. Maybe he slipped into a place he was told not to enter. Maybe he now carries a secret anxiety that will follow him to the medical inspection. Maybe the military police saw him and he does not yet know what will happen. The quiet after pleasure can be its own kind of reckoning. A soldier may have wanted only to forget the war for a few hours, but the army did not forget him. His name was still on the roster, his body was still needed, his conduct still belonged to the unit. Tomorrow he might march, tomorrow he might go back toward the line, tomorrow he might stand before an officer and explain why he missed curfew, why his tunic is torn, why he smells of drink, why he was seen in a forbidden district, why another man claims he owes him money, why a French shopkeeper has complained, why a medical officer has reported him unfit. What makes this so human is that the forbidden comforts were not always wicked in themselves. Warmth is not wicked. Laughter is not wicked. A glass of wine is not automatically a collapse of character. Cards are not evil because they have numbers on them. Desire is not something invented by bad men in bad streets. The army's problem was not that these comforts existed. The problem was that war changed their consequences. In a peaceful life, a foolish night might become a story. In wartime, it might become lost manpower, disease, punishment, diplomatic trouble, unit resentment, or a gap in the line when the man was needed. And the men knew this, even when they mocked it. That is another important point. Soldiers could laugh at the lectures and still understand why medical officers were worried. They could complain about restrictions and still resent the man who came back drunk and useless. They could break rules and still believe other men should be punished for breaking the same rules too badly. Military morality is often practical like that. The same soldier who sneaks a drink may despise the man whose drinking causes the whole platoon to lose privileges. The same man who plays cards for small money may become furious if a cheater ruins the group. The same man who slips away for a woman may fear the hospital and the shame that could follow. Rules were not simply obeyed or rejected. They were negotiated, mocked, enforced informally, ignored when convenient, and suddenly treated as sacred when someone else's violation made life harder. This is one of the reasons the army used collective pressure. If too many men misbehaved in town, passes could be restricted. If a district became troublesome, it could be placed out of bounds. If disease rates rose, inspections and lectures increased. If fights became common, patrols grew stricter. One soldier's night out could make every other soldier's evening smaller. Men learned that freedom behind the line was always conditional. It depended on behaviour, reports, officers, local civilians, disease numbers, and the war's schedule. Rest was permitted, not owned. The contrast with the front is sharp but connected. In the trench, a man was forbidden to walk away because his absence endangered the position. Behind the line, he was forbidden from certain pleasures because they might make him absent later, or disorderly now, or sick when needed. The logic was the same. The individual desire had to be subordinated to the army's survival. The army could not stop men from wanting. It could only punish, redirect, frighten, lecture, inspect, and provide alternatives. There is a small sadness in that. These were often very young men. Many had never been far from home before the war. Some had crossed an ocean and found themselves among languages, foods, customs, and women that seemed completely new. They were living with danger and boredom side by side, which is one of the most unstable combinations human beings can experience. A day might contain nothing, and then a shell could make it unforgettable. An evening might feel free, and then a sergeant's voice could snap it shut. The army expected them to carry adult danger and accept schoolboy supervision. Sometimes they rose to it, sometimes they did not. So when we imagine the forbidden comforts behind the front, we should not picture only stern officers wagging fingers at reckless men. We should picture the whole scene. The warm cafe and the posted order, the payday card game and the corporal watching from the doorway, the YMCA hut with its stationery and moral posters, the military police at the bridge, the French woman who has learned which soldiers have money. The reformer in America convinced that prostitution can be stamped out if enough districts are closed. The doctor counting infections, the commander reading reports, the soldier laughing too loudly because silence would make him remember where he has to go next. By midnight, the village settles. The cafe shutters close. The men stumble or walk back to billets. Somewhere a patrol stops two soldiers and asks for passes. Somewhere a private hides his winnings in his sock. Somewhere another realises he has lost more than he meant to lose. Somewhere a man lies awake on straw, not from fear of shells this time, but from worry over what he did with his few hours of freedom. Somewhere an officer signs a report that turns the night into official language. Drunkenness, disorderly conduct, out of bounds, absence, venereal exposure, gambling, fighting, conduct prejudicial to good order. The phrases are dry. The night was not. And as the rear area darkens, another set of rules begins to matter more than all the others. Because there were forbidden comforts that could damage discipline slowly, and then there were forbidden acts that could kill a man in an instant. A bottle might make him careless. A woman might put him in the hospital. A card game might empty his pay. But a cigarette flame in the wrong place, one match cupped badly in the hand, one whispered conversation carried too far through cold night air, could draw the attention of someone watching from across no man's land. The army did not only regulate pleasure, it regulated darkness itself. The darkness at the front did not feel like the darkness you know at home. That is the first thing to set aside. It was not the darkness of a bedroom after you switch off a lamp. It was not the darkness of a quiet street after midnight, with porch lights glowing and a car passing every few minutes. It was a working darkness, a watched darkness, a darkness full of rules. It could hide you, which made it useful. It could reveal you, which made it dangerous. It could protect a patrol crossing no man's land, and in the same hour it could turn one careless cigarette into a target. For the American soldier in France, night was not the end of the day. In many ways, night was when the day became more serious. During daylight, men in forward positions often had to keep low and do their work below ground or under cover, because snipers and artillery observers were searching for movement. The Canadian War Museum describes nighttime in the trenches as both the busiest and most dangerous time, when soldiers went into no man's land to repair wire, dig trenches, patrol, raid, or gather information. That pattern was not unique to Canadians. It was part of trench warfare across the Western Front, and American units entering the line inherited the same hard logic. If you wanted to move, repair, listen, carry or crawl where the enemy might see you, darkness was often your only ally. But darkness was a poor ally. It helped everyone. The same night that let American work parties climb out with coils of barbed wire also let German patrols crawl forward with wire cutters, grenades, and knives. The same blackness that hid a ration party also hid a raiding party. A man could stare into no man's land until his eyes watered and still not know whether a dark shape was a bush, a broken post, a corpse, or someone alive and moving slowly toward him. This is why silence mattered. This is why light mattered. This is why a soldier could not smoke when he pleased, talk when he pleased, cough loudly when he pleased, or strike a match simply because his hands were cold and he wanted the small comfort of tobacco. Think about that comfort for a moment. A cigarette in World War I was not a small thing. For many soldiers, tobacco was one of the few pleasures that fit in a pocket, survived bad weather if protected well enough, and could be shared without needing a table or a roof. It gave the hand something to do. It gave the mouth something familiar. It made waiting more bearable. A cigarette could mark a pause after fatigue duty, a minute after a meal, a few breaths before sleep, a scrap of normal life held between two fingers. Tobacco became deeply woven into soldier life during the war, and cigarettes in particular became far more common among troops than they had been in many parts of pre-war civilian culture. Now put that cigarette in the front line at night. The paper glows when a man draws on it. The ember brightens, then fades. Brightens, then fades. To the smoker, it is tiny. To someone watching through darkness, it can be enough. There is an old trench warning often repeated in different forms. The first match lights the cigarette, the second lights another, and the third gives the sniper time to aim. Whether told as hard advice or soldier folklore, the meaning was simple. Do not give the enemy a rhythm. Do not give him a point. Do not make your body visible by the little glow you think nobody can see. So smoking became regulated by place and time. A man might be allowed to smoke in a dugout. If the light was shielded and the air did not become unbearable, he might smoke farther behind the line. He might smoke during daylight in a covered place. But on sentry duty, at a listening post, on patrol near the parapet, or while moving at night, the cigarette could be forbidden as sharply as leaving a rifle behind. The rule did not exist because officers disliked pleasure. Many officers smoked too. The rule existed because the front punished small lights. A match was even worse. A cigarette ember might be a single dull red point. A match gave a sudden flare. In a room, that flare is nothing. In no man's land, it is a little sunrise. It lights the face, the hands, the edge of a helmet, the corner of a trench wall. It tells the enemy that someone is there and that the someone has forgotten where he is. The man striking it may not even be thinking about light. He may be thinking about the tremble in his fingers. He may be thinking about the way tobacco steadies him. He may be thinking about home, where matches are harmless, where flame means a stove, a lamp, a pipe, a father's hand cupped against wind. Then the match catches, and for 1 second the war sees him. There were other lights to control too. Lanterns had to be shielded. Dugout entrances had to be covered. Flashlights, if used, had to be used carefully. A moving beam could give away a trench layout. A lamp visible from above the parapet might bring rifle fire or shells. Even behind the front, lights could be restricted when aircraft were feared, or when enemy observation reached farther than men liked to believe. But the front line made the lesson most immediate. Light was no longer neutral. It was information. That is the key to many of these rules. The soldier was not just forbidden to make light because light was bright. He was forbidden because light spoke. A match said, "Here is a man." A lamp said, "Here is an entrance." A cooking fire might say, "Here are men gathered." A moving lantern could say, "Here is a trench path." A cigarette could say, "Here is a sentry who is bored or cold or careless." The enemy did not need a conversation if the flame had already talked. Silence worked the same way. Men were not told to keep quiet because the army loved discomfort. They were told because sound carried strangely at night. A voice that seemed low in a trench could move across still air farther than expected. Metal striking metal could ring. A shovel could scrape too sharply against stone or frozen earth. A rifle bolt handled carelessly could sound enormous to men already listening for danger. Wire being repaired could twang. A loose mess tin could betray a patrol. A cough might be unavoidable, but men still tried to smother it. The front at night was filled with listening. Listening posts were part of that world. A few men might be sent ahead of the main trench, closer to no man's land, to hear movement before the enemy reached the wire. Imagine that duty. Not the loud version of war, not a charge or a bombardment, but the opposite. A man lying still in a shallow place, perhaps with another soldier beside him, eyes straining into blackness, ears working harder than they had ever worked in civilian life. He listens for wire being cut, for whispering, for mud sucking at a boot, for a cough across the dark, for anything that is not wind, rats, rain, or his own heartbeat. He cannot smoke. He cannot talk except in the smallest possible way. He cannot shift whenever his legs ache. His job is not to be brave in a grand gesture. His job is to become almost part of the ground. Night discipline asked men to control the body in ways that sound simple, only to someone comfortable. Do not speak. Do not show a light. Do not sleep. Do not move without orders. Do not fire unless necessary. Do not expose yourself above the parapet. Do not clatter equipment. Do not lose touch with the man beside you. Do not mistake fear for a target and start shooting into darkness, because once one nervous rifle fires, others may join, and suddenly the whole line is awake. Flares are going up, machine guns are searching the wire, artillery may answer, and what began as a sound in the dark becomes a night of danger for everyone. Sentry duty was the centre of this discipline. A sentry was a man given the temporary burden of everyone else's sleep. That is not an exaggeration. While others rested, he watched. While others tried to close their eyes in wet dugouts or fire bays, he remained at his post. His alertness was not private virtue. It was a shield laid over other bodies. Military law treated failure on sentry duty with extreme seriousness. The Articles of War provided that a sentinel found drunk or sleeping on post, or leaving before being relieved, could suffer death or another punishment if the offence was committed in wartime. Again, that does not mean every exhausted sentry was executed. It means the law understood the post as sacred in war. To sleep there was not merely to rest at the wrong time, it was to leave a door open. Now imagine being that sentry after midnight. The night is cold enough that his fingers have lost some feeling. His coat is not warm in the way a coat should be warm at home. It is damp, and damp cloth steals heat slowly. His boots are heavy. His eyes burn. He has already been awake too long, and the body has begun that cruel negotiation where it insists that a few seconds of sleep would solve everything. The trench is quiet, but not peacefully quiet. Somewhere a rat moves. Somewhere water drips. Farther down the line, someone shifts and mud makes a sucking sound. A flare rises from the enemy side, and for a few moments the ruined land appears in a pale light. Wire shining, shell holes silvered, posts and scraps and shapes all suddenly visible. Then it falls, and the dark returns thicker than before. The sentry wants to sit. He may not be allowed to. He wants to smoke. He cannot. He wants to whisper to the next man just to remind himself he is not alone. He should not. He wants to rub his eyes, but his rifle must remain ready. He wants time to move faster, but time at night in a trench can become stubborn. Every minute has weight. The discipline here is not dramatic, and that is what makes it powerful. A charge may last minutes. Sentry duty lasts and lasts. A man's courage is not always tested by whether he can run forward under fire. Sometimes it is tested by whether he can stay awake when every cell in his body is begging him to disappear into sleep. The army's harshness around sentry duty came from that simple truth. One sleeping man could let a raiding party reach the wire. One abandoned post could let the enemy enter a trench before anyone understood what was happening. One careless shout could warn a German patrol that it had been heard, or tell it where to throw grenades. Trench raids made the darkness especially tense. Raids were often carried out at night because daylight movement over no man's land was usually too exposed. The Imperial War Museums describes trench raids as regular operations in which soldiers crossed no man's land to attack enemy trenches, capture prisoners, kill defenders, or gather intelligence. The Canadian War Museum likewise notes that nighttime could bring patrols and raids intended to capture or kill enemy troops and gather information. For the men waiting in the trench, that meant night was not merely absence of sunlight, it was the time when the enemy might come close enough to touch. A raid depended on quiet. Men might darken their faces, leave behind anything that rattled, carry clubs, knives, pistols, grenades, wire cutters, and sometimes special equipment. They moved slowly because speed made noise. They crawled because standing made silhouettes. They tried to find gaps in wire or make them without being heard. The defenders tried to hear them before they arrived. This turned the whole front into a contest of small sounds. A canteen knocking against a buckle, a boot sliding on a board, a whispered curse, a bayonet scraping wood. The ordinary clumsiness of human movement became a battlefield signal. For the American doughboy new to the line, the old Allied soldiers' obsession with quiet may have seemed excessive at first. New troops often had to learn the front's rules the hard way. Training could tell a man to keep his head down, but the front taught him why. Training could say no smoking on post, but the front showed what happened when a flare caught a face exposed too long. Training could say, do not talk, but after one night of hearing how far sound travelled, a man understood the rule in his bones. The front was a classroom with very severe methods. There was also the discipline of not firing too soon. That may seem strange. If the enemy is out there, why not shoot? But random firing at night could waste ammunition, reveal positions, start retaliation, and create panic. A nervous man shooting at a shadow might expose the trench more than protect it. A machine gun opening without orders could draw artillery. A line that fired at every noise could exhaust itself and still miss the real danger. So men were taught to distinguish, to wait, to report, to use flares, to listen. Waiting while frightened is its own form of obedience. Flares changed the night in sudden bursts. A flare going up could freeze every man in no man's land. If you were caught moving in its light, you might be seen. Patrols learned to drop flat to become one more lump in a landscape already full of lumps. In the trench, men used flare light to scan wire and ground ahead. But flare light also damaged the eye's adjustment to darkness. After brightness, the dark became darker, so night work moved in intervals. Blackness, flare, stillness, blackness again. The soldier had to learn when to move and when to become stone. Now add gas to the night, and the rules become even more unforgiving. Poison gas made darkness worse because gas did not need to be seen clearly to be deadly. Sometimes a shell burst sounded different. Sometimes a smell came low over the ground. Sometimes a lookout heard the hiss or the pop of gas shells and shouted the warning. The Army Historical Foundation explains that doughboys used several warning methods for gas, from yelling gas to bells, horns and wooden rattles, with klaxon horns and rattles becoming especially useful because they could carry the alarm along the line. Think of that sound at night, not music, not a bugle call with the order in it, a rattle, a horn, a shout, gas, gas, gas. Men waking in holes, hands going to mask bags, bodies moving before the mind is fully awake. The gas mask was uncomfortable, awkward, and frightening in its own way, but it had to go on quickly. A US Army Command and General Staff College study of chemical warfare in the American experience notes that the 1st Division's training used gas alarms and smoke pots to improve mask skill, and instructors warned that in a gas attack, there were only the quick and the dead. That phrase is brutal because it had to be. Night gave no time for debate. If the alarm sounded, a soldier was not allowed to finish a thought, ask whether the gas was real, or search lazily in the dark. He had to stop breathing, get the mask out, fit it, and keep it on until the proper all clear. And he was not allowed to decide for himself that the danger had passed. That may have been one of the hardest rules. The mask was miserable. It made breathing heavy. It made the face sweat. It made speech strange. It trapped a man inside his own fear. In the dark, in a crowded dugout or trench, a masked soldier could feel half buried. So the temptation to lift it just for a second must have been enormous. Just to smell real air. Just to breathe normally. Just to prove the danger was gone. But gas could linger in low places, dugouts, shell holes and woods. The same US Army study describes an Answerville sector attack in February 1918, where men removed masks on their own initiative while gas remained dangerous stayed or worked unmasked in low places, and suffered casualties from breaches of gas discipline. That is night discipline in its most terrible form. Obey the rule even when your body hates it. Keep the mask on when your lungs want relief. Do not light a fire in a sealed dugout if it might draw gas inside. Do not exert yourself after being slightly gassed, because standing orders say it may worsen your condition. Do not trust your own comfort as evidence of safety. In gas warfare, instinct could betray you. The rules around silence and light also entered the sleeping arrangements. Men did not simply sleep as they liked. In forward areas, sleep was organised around watches, stand-to, work parties, alarms, and expected attacks. Dawn and dusk were especially tense because attacks were often feared at those times. Trench routines commonly included stand-to, when soldiers manned positions and prepared for possible enemy action. So the night's end did not bring softness. It brought another period of alertness, often before proper rest had been found at all. A man might spend part of the night carrying wire, part on sentry, part trying to sleep, then be shaken awake for stand-to before dawn, rifle ready, eyes raw, hands cold. If you have ever been awakened suddenly in the dark, you know the brief confusion before the room becomes familiar. Now imagine waking in a trench where confusion can kill. Was that a shell, a gas alarm, a raid, a sergeant's voice? Is your rifle within reach? Where is your mask? Where is your helmet? Which way is the parapet? Is the man beside you moving because he is awake, or because something has happened? The soldier's night was full of these small tests. The rules gave him a pattern to follow when the mind was not yet fully present. There is a tendency to imagine discipline as something imposed only from above by officers and regulations. But frontline night discipline also came from below, from the men themselves. A careless soldier endangered the group. If a man talked too loudly, others told him to shut up. If he flashed a light, they cursed him before an officer needed to. If he rattled equipment before a patrol, he might feel the immediate anger of men who were about to crawl into darkness with him. The rule was official, but the enforcement could be personal. Nobody wanted to die because someone else wanted to smoke. That kind of peer discipline can be harsher than formal discipline, because it carries no paperwork. It is a hand gripping your sleeve in the dark. It is a hissed warning. It is the look a man gives you after a bullet snaps overhead because your movement drew attention. In the front line, men became experts in the ways other men could become dangerous without meaning to. A loud laugh, a loose buckle, a match, a cough uncovered, a body standing too high, a sentry leaning where he should watch. Small things, always small things, until they were not. The strangeness is that these rules did not remove fear. They organised it. A soldier remained afraid, but he knew what to do with his hands. Do not show light. Listen. Keep low. Check the wire. Pass the word quietly. Wake the next man for watch. Mask when ordered. Stay still under flare light. Wait for stand down. In a world where enormous forces were beyond control, these tiny controls mattered. They could not stop artillery. They could not make no man's land safe, but they gave men a way to behave inside danger. Let us return to one frontline trench in the hour before dawn. The night has been long. A carrying party came through after midnight, slipping and swearing under their breath with boxes of ammunition. Somewhere out front, a wiring party worked for an hour, then came back missing one pair of wire cutters and one man with a torn hand. A flare went up every few minutes for a while, then less often. At 2 a.m, there was a gas alarm down the line, and everyone masked until the all-clear moved back by word of mouth. At 3, a sentry thought he heard wire, and men stood ready in silence until nothing came of it. At 4, the cold reached the point where it seemed personal. Now the order for stand to passes quietly. Men rise, rifles come into hands, faces turn toward the enemy. No one lights a cigarette. Not yet. That may be the detail that brings the whole thing home. The man may have tobacco in his pocket. He may want it badly. He may have earned, by any ordinary measure, one small comfort. But the rule holds him. The dark is still too dangerous. The enemy is still too near. The line is still listening. He waits. This was not the largest sacrifice of the war. It was not the sacrifice that fills monuments, but it was part of the daily surrender that soldiering required, the surrender of little freedoms, when to speak, when to smoke, when to sleep, when to show a light, when to breathe through a mask, when to trust your senses and when to distrust them. The army took command of actions so small that in civilian life they barely counted as decisions. At the front they counted. And when the sky finally began to pale, when the shapes ahead slowly returned to themselves, when the wire became wire again, and not a black tangle of possible movement, when the order came that stand could ease, the soldier still did not step into freedom. Daylight brought its own restrictions, its own dangers, its own inspections and fatigues. He might smoke then, in the right place, shielded enough, with someone grumbling nearby and another man asking for a light. He might laugh about the night because laughter was easier than admitting how tightly he had held himself. But the lesson remained. At the front, even darkness had rules, and those rules did not end with what a soldier could say, where he could go, what he could drink, or whether he could strike a match. They reached into his hands in another way too. Because war scatters objects everywhere. Rifles dropped by dead men, helmets with holes in them, watches, knives, letters, buttons, pistols, binoculars, religious medals, shell fragments, enemy signs, pieces of uniforms, things that looked useful, things that looked valuable, things that looked like proof. A soldier surrounded by destruction could easily begin to think that whatever lay in the mud belonged to whoever picked it up. But the army had rules for that too, because not everything in a war zone was free for the taking. And once the night loosened its hold, once the cigarette could finally be lit in the proper place, and the men could speak a little louder without someone hissing them back into silence, the war left another kind of temptation at their feet. Not drink this time, not a gambling table, not a forbidden doorway in a French town, something smaller and more immediate, an object lying in the mud, a German helmet, a belt buckle, a pocket knife, a pistol, a watch, a pair of binoculars, a field glass case, a bayonet, a shoulder strap with a unit number on it, a photograph dropped from a dead man's tunic, a letter in German, a map folded into an officer's pocket, a signboard from a trench, a brass shell case, a button, a medal, a cracked pipe, a torn piece of camouflage cloth. A thing that did not belong to the soldier 5 minutes ago, but now sits within reach, separated from its owner by capture, flight, death, or chaos. War scatters property in a way ordinary life does not. In ordinary life, an object has a place. A watch belongs in a pocket. A photograph belongs in a wallet or a drawer. A helmet belongs on a head or on a hook. A tool belongs in a shed. A rifle belongs to the man carrying it or to the government that issued it. But after shell fire, after a raid, after an attack across broken ground, after a trench has changed hands, objects lose their clear homes. They lie in shell holes, under boards, beside bodies, in dugouts abandoned too quickly, in villages evacuated under pressure, in enemy positions where men were alive in the morning and gone by afternoon. To a tired soldier, surrounded by ruined things, it could start to seem as if the normal rules of ownership had been blown apart with everything else, but the army did not see it that way. Or at least it could not afford to see it that way. There were rules about what a soldier could take, what he had to turn in, what belonged to the government, what belonged to civilians, what counted as enemy equipment, what counted as intelligence, and what was simply theft with mud on it. The line was not always clean in practice. Men crossed it. Men argued about it. Officers ignored small violations and punished larger ones. Souvenirs came home in duffel bags, barracks trunks, and coat pockets. But the existence of souvenirs should not fool us into thinking every object was free for the taking. The legal background was clear enough in broad terms. The Hague Regulations of 1907, which shaped the laws of land warfare during the First World War, stated that private property had to be respected and could not be confiscated, and that pillage was formally forbidden. The same regulations allowed an occupying army to take possession of certain state-owned property and military resources, including depots of arms, transport, stores, supplies, and movable state property useful for military operations. But that was a right of the army, not a private license for every soldier to fill his pockets. That distinction matters. It is the difference between capture and theft. The army could seize enemy weapons. The army could collect documents. The army could gather equipment, maps, signal gear, artillery pieces, ammunition, and anything that might help understand or defeat the enemy. But a private soldier taking a civilian's clock from a farmhouse was not performing military seizure. He was stealing. A man pocketing a German officer's map might think he had found a souvenir, but an intelligence officer might see a document that belonged in the hands of G2. A soldier pulling a ring from a dead man's finger was not collecting war material. He was stepping into something older, darker, and much harder to excuse. Let us picture the moment carefully, because this is where the moral difficulty lives. A doughboy enters a captured German dugout after a hard fight. The air is stale, thick with damp earth, sweat, smoke, and the strange chemical smell that clings to underground places where men have lived too long under bombardment. There are bunks built into the wall, a table, a candle stub, empty tins, a torn blanket, a few German newspapers, maybe a helmet hanging from a peg, maybe a Mauser rifle leaning in a corner, maybe a framed photograph of a woman and two children tucked above a shelf by a man who had also wanted to remember home. The American soldier is breathing hard. He may have been scared minutes ago. He may still be scared. His hands are unsteady. Around him, other men are shouting, laughing, checking corners, calling for prisoners, looking for wounded, making sure the position is secure. He sees the helmet. It is not just a helmet now. It is proof. Proof that he was here. Proof that the German army was not some invisible machine across no man's land. Proof that he crossed the wire or entered the trench or survived the attack. He reaches for it. Was he allowed to take it? The honest answer is that it depended on the item, the circumstances, the local orders, the officer present, and whether anyone thought the thing had military value. German helmets were among the most desired battlefield trophies in the First World War. The Imperial War Museums notes that German spiked helmets were especially sought-after trophies by Allied soldiers. A helmet taken from an abandoned enemy position might be treated very differently from a watch taken from a civilian house. A bayonet picked up after a battle might be tolerated or even expected as a trophy. A bundle of German papers might be confiscated by an officer because it could help intelligence. A pistol could be dangerous, valuable, and restricted. A live grenade was not a souvenir, no matter how interesting it looked. That last point seems obvious until you remember how young some of these men were and how strange the battlefield was. Soldiers have always had an appetite for souvenirs, partly because war is so difficult to explain later. A man who comes home with nothing but words may feel that nobody will understand. A helmet, a belt buckle, a shell fragment, a German knife, these things have weight. They can be placed on a table, they can be shown to a brother, a neighbour, a child not yet born. They say, I was there, even when the man himself cannot easily describe what there means. Souvenirs also gave men a sense of victory they could hold. The First World War often denied soldiers clear results. Men advanced a few hundred yards, lost them, regained them, sat for weeks in mud, and heard only rumours about the larger situation. But a captured helmet was simple. It had belonged to the enemy. Now it did not. Did. A belt buckle stamped with a crown or imperial motto felt like a small piece of Germany in the hand. A bayonet taken from a trench could become evidence that the faceless enemy had been met and overcome. In a war that made individual action feel tiny, objects made action tangible. But that is exactly why the army had to be careful. A battlefield full of objects can turn soldiers into hunters of things when they are supposed to be securing ground, guarding prisoners, collecting intelligence, treating wounded, and preparing for counterattack. A man distracted by souvenirs might miss danger. He might pick up something booby-trapped. He might waste time searching bodies while orders are moving. He might quarrel with another soldier over who found an item first. He might pocket a document that should have gone to intelligence. He might strip enemy dead in a way that enrages prisoners, damages discipline, and stains the reputation of the force. Enemy documents were especially important. To a private soldier, a German notebook might look like an odd keepsake. To intelligence officers, it might contain unit numbers, names, supply notes, map references, code information, artillery observations, or clues that only mattered when combined with other captured material. The National Archives' description of AEF records shows that captured German documents were maintained by the American Expeditionary Force's G2 Intelligence Section, alongside records on German divisions, enemy works, radio intelligence, codes, ciphers, maps, and other operational information. That tells us something important. Paper mattered, not just rifles and guns. Paper. A soldier who took the wrong paper as a souvenir might be stealing from the army's understanding of the enemy. Imagine an American officer entering that same dugout and seeing his men poring through papers. He does not see quaint souvenirs. He sees possible intelligence being scattered, muddied, torn, pocketed, or burned for warmth. He sees maps that might identify enemy artillery. He sees letters that may help identify a unit. He sees signs, markings, notebooks, and orders that should be collected in a systematic way. The men see trophies. He sees evidence. The difference is not small. There was also the matter of prisoners. A captured German soldier might carry items that were military, personal, or both. His rifle and ammunition were clearly no longer his in any meaningful battlefield sense. His letters, photographs, watch, ring, religious medal, or family keepsake were something else. Searching prisoners for weapons and documents was a military necessity. Robbing them was not. Yet the boundary could become ugly very quickly. A prisoner standing, frightened with hands raised, is in no position to argue if a soldier takes his watch. The stronger man can always invent a reason. The army had to forbid this because once prisoners believe surrender means robbery or mistreatment, surrender itself becomes more dangerous for everyone. The Hague Rules also protected surrendered enemies from being killed or wounded after laying down arms. The same body of regulations treated private property and pillage as matters of law rather than optional courtesy. This was not sentimental, it was practical as well as moral. Armies want enemies to surrender when beaten. If soldiers gain a reputation for abusing prisoners or stripping them of personal property, enemy soldiers may fight longer out of fear. Discipline toward prisoners is therefore not kindness alone. It is military logic. Civilian property was another problem entirely. The American soldier in France often moved through villages that had been lived in, shelled, evacuated, reoccupied, billeted, damaged, and reused by armies. A farmhouse might have no family present, but it was still someone's farmhouse. A cupboard might be broken open, a clock might still hang on a wall, a blanket might be folded in a room where soldiers are sleeping on straw, a chicken might wander in a yard, a bottle might be in a cellar. A soldier who takes these things can tell himself many stories. The family is gone, the house is damaged anyway, the army needs food, the French owe us hospitality, the Germans did worse. No one will miss one blanket, everyone takes something. But the law didn't vanish because the house was empty. Private property was still private property. Requisitions could be made for military needs, but under authority, with rules, and ideally with receipts and compensation, not by hungry men helping themselves. The Hague Regulation stated that requisitions in kind and services in occupied territory had to be for the needs of the army, proportionate to the country's resources, demanded on the authority of the commander, and paid for in cash if possible, or recorded by receipt. That is very different from a soldier taking a civilian's blanket because he is cold, and yet he was cold. That is the uncomfortable part. Rules are cleanest when everyone is fed, dry, calm, and properly supplied. War rarely gives you those conditions. A soldier who had been wet for days might look at a civilian blanket and feel not greed but need. A man who had eaten badly might look at eggs or wine or preserved food in a cellar and feel that survival outranks ownership. A unit arriving exhausted might occupy a barn and use what is there because there is no time to ask. Officers could authorize requisition. Quartermasters could arrange payment. But in the confusion of actual movement, many small acts occurred before paperwork could catch up, and some acts were not military necessity at all. They were just taking. This is one reason armies try to regulate contact with civilian property so tightly. Not because every soldier is naturally a thief, but because hardship erodes the little barriers that keep people honest. Cold makes theft feel reasonable. Hunger makes it feel temporary. Anger makes it feel deserved. Fear makes it feel irrelevant. Victory makes it feel permitted. And once one man takes something, the next man has a ready-made excuse. The house has already been looted. The cupboard is already open. The good things are already gone. Why should I be the only fool who takes nothing? This is how discipline can collapse in small stages. It does not always begin with men smashing doors. It can begin with one apple, one scarf, one bottle, one watch, one chicken. Then the distinction between battlefield trophy and civilian loot becomes blurred by habit. The army feared this because a force that begins by taking small things can end by losing control of itself. Pillage is not only a crime against civilians, it is a sign that command has weakened. For American commanders, there was also the question of reputation among allies. France was not enemy territory. Much of the American Expeditionary Forces service took place on Allied soil, in villages and towns belonging to a nation that had already endured years of invasion, occupation in some regions, shelling, shortages, and death. An American soldier stealing from a French civilian was not taking from the enemy. He was stealing from the people he had supposedly come to help. That made the offence especially shameful. It could damage local cooperation, create resentment, and give French civilians reason to see American troops not as rescuers or allies, but as another burden. Think of a French woman returning to a room after troops have moved on. The soldiers may have slept there only one night. To them it was a billet, one stop in a long movement. To her it is the room where her husband once repaired boots, where a child slept before evacuation, where a wedding photograph had stood on a shelf. A missing blanket is not just cloth when cloth is scarce. A missing clock is not just an object when it may be one of the few things that survived shelling. A missing family photograph is not useful to a soldier, but it may be irreplaceable to her. The soldier may not even think about the owner because the owner is absent. But absence is not abandonment. War creates this moral distortion again and again. A thing without its owner nearby begins to look ownerless. A village damaged by shells begins to look like no one's responsibility. A room used by troops begins to feel public. But the past owner, the future owner, and the rightful owner still exist even when not visible. Military discipline is partly the act of making soldiers remember invisible owners. There were also dangers in touching abandoned enemy material. A shiny object could be bait. Weapons could be loaded. Grenades could be unstable. Shells could fail to explode and then kill the curious man who handled them. Dugouts could contain traps, loose ammunition, gas-contaminated clothing, or unsafe equipment. A soldier looking for souvenirs might find exactly what he wanted and lose his hand for it. Later, military guidance in other wars would warn soldiers that tempting enemy items could be booby-trapped. While the specific phrasing belongs to later conflicts, the basic danger of unexploded ordnance and enemy equipment was already real on the First World War battlefield. The battlefield did not care whether a man picked something up for greed, memory, or boredom. Metal was metal, explosive was explosive. A shell fragment could be harmless, a live fuse could be waiting, a German pistol might be unloaded or not, a grenade might be safe or not. Soldiers learned quickly that curiosity had a cost. Some learned because someone told them. Others learned because someone nearby screamed. Still, souvenirs kept moving. We know this because they survive. German helmets in American collections, belt buckles in family boxes, trench art made from shell cases, bayonets kept in attics, photographs of doughboys posing with captured gear, stories handed down with objects whose exact origin became less clear over time. This is the other side of the Army's rules. Regulations do not erase human desire. They only define what must be hidden, justified, turned in, or smuggled. A soldier might mail home a small souvenir if allowed. He might carry one in his pack. He might trade with another man. He might exaggerate the story later. A helmet found in a dump could become a helmet taken in a charge. A belt buckle bought from a French child could become one pulled from a German trench. Memory improves trophies. Families rarely ask too many questions if the object looked heroic on the mantle. There is something almost tender in small souvenirs, and something unsettling too. A button from an enemy coat is just a button until you remember the coat had a wearer. A helmet is just metal until you imagine the head it was meant to protect. A pipe is just a pipe until you picture the man who held it during quiet hours in a dugout, perhaps writing home in German while an American soldier elsewhere wrote, somewhere in France. The souvenir turns the enemy into proof, but if you look at it long enough, it can also turn him back into a person. The soldiers themselves did not always want that second part. Sometimes the object was easier if the original owner disappeared from the story. "I got this from a German dugout" is simpler than "this belonged to a man who had a mother too." War encourages simplification because complexity is hard to carry. A trophy lets the enemy remain enemy-shaped. A personal letter in the same pocket may disturb that shape. That is another reason documents and personal items were sensitive. A military map could help intelligence. A family photograph could complicate hatred. A letter from home in German could be useless to a private who could not read it. But if someone translated it, it might reveal that the enemy soldier was also cold, lonely, hungry, worried about harvests, children, parents, and whether he would return. Some soldiers kept such things. Some threw them away. Some handed them over. Some never touched them at all, because there are objects that make the dead too present. The army, however, could not run on emotion. It had categories: captured arms, enemy documents, government property, private property, contraband, loot, souvenirs, evidence, salvage, intelligence material. The battlefield was messy, but bureaucracy tried to sort it. Items of military value were supposed to be collected because armies needed them. Civilians' property was supposed to be protected because law and discipline required it. Personal theft was supposed to be punished because it damaged order. Souvenirs occupied the grey ground between official tolerance and official concern. The grey ground is where soldiers lived much of the time. A German helmet taken after a battle might be permitted by one officer and confiscated by another. A pistol might be allowed as a trophy in one circumstance and forbidden in another because it was dangerous, valuable, or needed for inspection. A document might look harmless to the man who found it, and important to the intelligence officer who later asks where it went. A civilian blanket might be requisitioned properly by one unit and stolen by another. A shell casing might be turned into trench art and sent home, while a live shell might kill the man who thought he had found a decoration. Let us imagine the doughboy again, standing in the captured dugout. His hand is on the German helmet. Around him, The position is still being cleared. An officer calls out that papers are to be collected and turned in. Someone else shouts for prisoners to be moved back. A wounded man is asking for water. Another soldier is laughing because he has found a German sign he wants to keep. The doughboy lifts the helmet and looks inside. Maybe there is a name written there. Maybe not. If there is, the object changes. It becomes less like equipment and more like a trace of a man. He can keep it, perhaps. Or he can be ordered to drop it. Or he can carry it for a while and lose it during the next march, because war is very good at taking back what men think they have claimed. The thing that matters for our story is not whether this one helmet goes home. It is that even in this small act, the soldier is not completely free. His hand is governed by law, orders, danger, intelligence needs, discipline, morality, and the eyes of the men around him. And once you notice that, the whole battlefield changes. It is no longer just a place where men are ordered to advance or hold. It is a place where they are told what not to touch. Do not strip civilians' homes. Do not rob prisoners. Do not pocket papers that intelligence needs. Do not waste time hunting trophies when the position is not secure. Do not bring back dangerous explosives because you want something impressive. Do not confuse military capture with private greed. Do not let the chaos of war convince you that ownership has vanished. These rules were not always followed. No honest history would pretend they were. Soldiers took things. They mailed things. They hid things. They justified things. Some took only harmless battlefield scraps. Some crossed into theft. Some probably did both and told themselves one story about it. But the fact that the army needed rules tells us something important about the temptations of war. Destruction does not remove desire, it increases it. Men surrounded by loss often reach for objects because objects feel solid. They hold a piece of the day that survived. They let a man say later, "This happened. I was there. I came back with this." The problem is that not every object is innocent, and not every act of taking is memory. Sometimes it is robbery. Sometimes it is carelessness. Sometimes it is the first step away from discipline. Sometimes it is an intelligence failure. Sometimes it is dangerous stupidity wrapped in the excitement of a trophy. The army had to care because the soldiers' hands could damage more than property. They could damage trust, evidence, safety, and the thin line between a fighting force and an armed crowd. By evening, the captured position is quieter. The prisoners have been sent back. The wounded have been carried out if there are enough stretchers. The dead remain where the living have not yet had time or strength to move them. A few objects are gone. A few have been piled for collection. Papers sit in a sack for intelligence. Rifles are stacked. A broken helmet lies in the mud because no one wanted that one. Somewhere a soldier has slipped a belt buckle into his pocket. Somewhere another has been told sharply to put something down. Somewhere an officer is writing a report that will make the day sound more orderly than it felt. The doughboy moves on with the rest. What he carries may be official equipment, a permitted souvenir, or something he should not have taken. The weight may be small, but the meaning is not. In war, even a pocket can become a disputed place, and the rules around his hands led naturally to the rules around the rest of his body, because the army did not only tell him what objects were forbidden, it told him what he had to keep on, what he had to carry, what he had to wear, and what he had to obey even when fear, heat, mud, pride, or exhaustion told him to do otherwise. A helmet could not simply be tossed aside because it was heavy. A gas mask could not be treated as a nuisance. An order could not be debated because it sounded unreasonable in the moment. The same army that cared whether he pocketed a German pistol also cared whether he kept his own equipment ready when the next shell came in. And when the soldier moved on from the captured dugout, when whatever he had taken or left behind disappeared into the larger movement of the day, the army's rules closed around him again in a more direct way. His hands were not only forbidden from stealing, pocketing, or mishandling what did not belong to him, his hands were also required to keep hold of what did: rifle, ammunition, helmet, gas mask, entrenching tool, canteen, first aid packet, identification tags, the awkward collection of objects that made him not just a young man in a uniform, but a usable soldier in a battle where the difference between obedience and panic could be measured in seconds. This is where the forbidden list changes shape. Earlier, so many of the rules were about things a soldier could not do because they threatened discipline from the outside. He could not say too much in a letter. He could not walk away from the line. He could not drink himself useless behind the front. He could not light a cigarette in the wrong place. He could not take property that belonged to civilians, prisoners, or the army. But once battle came, once the whistle blew, or the barrage started, or the gas alarm sounded, the rules became more intimate. They attached themselves to his own body. Do not remove the mask. Do not throw away your equipment. Do not cast away your arms. Do not disobey the order. Do not run. Do not stop because fear has finally made a convincing argument. That last rule was never written in quite that human language, but it sat behind many others. Fear itself was not illegal. No army could make it illegal, because every honest man at the front knew fear. Officers knew it. Sergeants knew it. The private with a rifle knew it. Fear was as common as mud. The army's problem was not that soldiers felt afraid. The problem was what fear might make them do. Fear could make a man lift his head at the wrong moment. Fear could make him tear off a gas mask because he felt he was suffocating. Fear could make him leave a wounded comrade because staying felt impossible. Fear could make him drop his rifle, run to the rear, ignore a command, crowd into a shell hole, or refuse to move forward when the men around him were still going. Military law did not punish the feeling. It punished the act that followed. Under the US Articles of War, willfully disobeying a lawful command from a superior officer could be punished by death or by another sentence from a court-martial, and misbehaviour before the enemy included running away, shamefully abandoning a post, casting away arms or ammunition, quitting a post to plunder, creating false alarms, or conduct that endangered the safety of a command. Those words are severe because battle is severe. The law was not designed to describe the softness of a man's private terror. It was designed to hold a line of men in place when that terror became contagious. Picture an American infantryman before an attack in 1918. He has been told what to carry, and the list feels longer than a body should reasonably bear. Rifle and bayonet, ammunition, grenades perhaps, mask and carrier, helmet, canteen, rations, extra socks if he's lucky, entrenching tool, first aid dressing, maybe wire cutters, signal panels or other special equipment depending on his job. Mud sticks to everything before the attack even begins. The helmet presses down on his head. The gas mask carrier bumps against his chest or side. The rifle gets heavier the longer he waits, which is one of the small insults of soldiering. Things do not need to gain weight to become heavier. Time does that for them. Now imagine him looking at the equipment and thinking, not in words exactly, but in a tired calculation. Could he move faster without this? Could he breathe easier without that? Does he really need the mask if there's been no gas today? Does he really need the helmet if it slides over his eyes? Does he need every round? Could he drop something in a trench corner and pick it up later? Men have always made these calculations. The body wants less weight. The army wants preparedness. The body wants comfort. The army wants survival in conditions where comfort is often the first lie. The steel helmet is a good example, because it seems obvious now. Of course, a soldier should keep his helmet on, but that obviousness came from the war itself. When the United States entered the conflict, its army did not yet have the same long experience with industrial shell fire that the British and French had gained since 1914. The Type M 1917 steel helmet became the first protective helmet adopted by the United States during World War I. It was essentially a copy of the British Mark I Brodie helmet, with the Americans using British-produced helmets until US factories could meet the army's needs. It was a simple-looking thing, shallow and wide-brimmed, not built to stop every bullet or save every life, but designed for a battlefield where fragments came from above and from the side after shells burst overhead or nearby. The helmet was not comfortable in the way a man wanted comfort. It could be hot in warm weather, cold in winter, awkward with mud and rain, and it did not sit like a civilian hat. It could interfere with hearing in small ways. It could tilt. It could feel clumsy when a man was crawling, digging, or trying to look through a firing slit. Some men decorated helmets. Some cursed them. Some treated them as bowls, seats, wash basins, or convenient containers when officers were not looking. But in battle, the rule was simple enough. Keep it on. It could not save a man from a direct artillery hit. Nothing on his head could do that, but it might turn or absorb a fragment that would otherwise enter his skull. It might be the difference between a wound and a burial. The gas mask was even less optional. In fact, the gas mask may be the clearest example of a rule that had to overpower instinct. With a helmet, a soldier could feel the protection even if he resented the weight. With a gas mask, the protection felt like punishment. It covered the face. It changed breathing. It made vision worse. It made sweat gather under the rubberized fabric. It made communication harder. It made men look less like themselves. And yet, when the alarm sounded, the mask had to go on at once. The US Army's own study of the American chemical warfare experience explains how seriously this training was treated. For the 1st Division, instruction in chemical warfare included 9 hours of defensive training. Troops in practice trenches heard gas alarms and smoke pots were used to simulate gas clouds, so men could practice putting on and wearing masks. Instructors warned them that in a gas attack there were only 2 kinds of soldiers, the quick and the dead. That was not a clever slogan invented for drama. It was a training principle. The soldier who waited to confirm the danger might already have taken the breath that injured him. There is a detail here that deserves attention because it shows how the body itself had to be trained against its own impulse. The British standard for the small box respirator expected masking in 6 seconds, and the drill began with the soldier holding his breath. The same US Army study notes that officers realised men exposed to German gas often instinctively took a deep breath, which meant they unintentionally inhaled poison, so AEF drill was later corrected by teaching doughboys to stop breathing when the gas alarm sounded. Stop breathing. Think about being ordered to do that under shell fire, not as a meditation exercise, not as a quiet instruction in a clean room. A rattle, horn, or shout comes through the noise. Your hands go to the carrier. You must stop breathing. Open the case. Seize the mask. Fit the nose clip. Put the mouthpiece in place if using that design. Pull the headpiece into position. Clear the straps, and do it before the next ordinary breath betrays you. That is a rule deep enough to enter muscle memory. It had to. A man could not rely on calm thought in a gas attack. Calm thought might not arrive. Training had to place the movement into the body so that when fear came, the hands already knew their business. This is why gas officers, drills, alarms, inspections and lectures mattered. They were not paperwork. They were attempts to teach a frightened body to do the right thing faster than panic could do the wrong thing. And even good discipline did not guarantee safety. Gas was not a fair test in which the careful always lived, and the careless always suffered. Shell bursts could knock men down or stun them before they masked. Explosions could tear off masks or damage hoses and face pieces. Prolonged mask wearing could cause sweat to interfere with the seal, and men seeking cover in shell holes, ravines and woods often moved into the low places where gas lingered longest. The same US Army chemical warfare history describes cases where even strict gas discipline could not prevent casualties, when gas shell concentrations were heavy, including an October 1918 attack on the 114th Infantry, in which an estimated 2,000 gas shells contributed to roughly 500 gas casualties. That is the part of battlefield rules we have to be honest about. They could reduce danger. They could not make battle reasonable. Still, the rules had to be followed because disobedience made the unreasonable worse. A A soldier who removed his mask too soon might not die at once. He might think he'd gotten away with it. Then his eyes might begin to burn, his chest might tighten, he might cough. With mustard gas, the delay could be especially cruel because injury did not always announce itself immediately in the way men expected. Chemical warfare during the First World War included agents such as chlorine, phosgene, and mustard, and medical historians have emphasised that gas created a new and complex medical threat for armies and public health systems. A man who trusted the first clear breath could be wrong. The rule was therefore simple, and it must have felt infuriating. Keep the mask on until the all clear is given, not until you feel better. Not until your friend says he thinks it is over. Not until the smell seems less strong. Not until you cannot stand it anymore. Until ordered. A man's lungs were his own, but in that moment the army claimed authority even over the timing of his next unfiltered breath. Helmets and gas masks were visible rules, things you could point to. Orders were different. Orders moved through voices, runners, whistles, hand signals, written messages, field telephones, and sometimes rumours repeated until they hardened into certainty. In battle, orders could be clear in the planning and confusing in the execution. A company might be told to advance behind a barrage, but the barrage could move too fast. A platoon might be ordered to hold a position, then lose contact with the men on either side. A runner might be killed carrying updated instructions. Telephone wires could be cut. Smoke could hide landmarks. Units could drift. Officers could fall. Men could find themselves in a shell hole asking whether they were ahead of schedule, behind schedule, on the wrong road, or already abandoned by the plan. And yet, obedience was still required. That is one of the hardest things to understand from outside. The army demanded obedience in circumstances that often made certainty impossible. A man might not know the whole situation. He usually did not. He might not understand why the order had been given. He often could not. But the system depended on him carrying out his part without pausing to redesign the battle according to what he personally saw. There were times when initiative mattered, especially when officers were killed and small unit leaders had to act. But initiative was not the same as doing whatever fear suggested. It had to serve the mission, not the private wish to be safer. The Articles of War also treated equipment issued to soldiers as military property that could not simply be lost, damaged, sold, or wrongfully disposed of without punishment. This applied in ordinary camp life, but in battle it became immediate. A man who threw away his rifle to run faster was not just lightening his load. He was turning himself from an armed soldier into a burden or a fugitive. A man who discarded ammunition because it was heavy might later leave himself or others unable to fight. A man who abandoned a gas mask because it annoyed him might need it an hour later. The army's insistence on equipment was not just fussiness, it was memory. The institution remembered all the ways men had needed things they had been tempted to discard. Fear made equipment feel heavier. That is not a metaphor. When a person is afraid, attention narrows. The mind looks for immediate relief. The pack strap digging into the shoulder becomes intolerable. The mask carrier catches on something and suddenly seems like the enemy. The helmet slips and the hand wants to fling it aside. The rifle feels clumsy when crawling. The bayonet catches. The canteen slaps against the hip. Every object becomes an argument against obedience. The trained soldier is not the man who does not hear those arguments. He is the man who hears them and keeps the equipment anyway. This is where sergeants mattered. Officers gave orders, planned movements, read maps, and carried responsibility. But sergeants and corporals lived close to the practical edge of obedience. They saw who had buckled the gas mask carrier wrong. They saw who had loosened straps too much. They saw who had quietly dropped something during a march. They noticed the man whose helmet was hanging from his pack instead of on his head. They shouted because shouting was often the fastest way to keep someone alive. A good non-commissioned officer was part teacher, part watchdog, part older brother, part threat. He knew that men in battle would become confused and afraid. so he tried to remove small failures before the larger test came. Imagine him moving down a line before an attack. Helmet on, chin strap fixed, mask where it belongs, rifle clean enough, bayonet secure, ammunition checked, first aid packet present, put that back, tighten that strap, get rid of whatever extra nonsense you're carrying, do not leave your canteen, do not lose sight of your section. When the gas alarm comes, mask first. When the order comes, move. If you're hit, call out. If your officer falls, listen for the next man. Keep going unless ordered otherwise. These instructions are not speeches. They are small repairs made to fear before fear has fully arrived. And then battle does arrive, never quite as expected. The sound is not one sound. It is many. Artillery, machine guns, rifles, shouts, whistles, explosions, dirt falling, men calling for stretcher bearers, officers trying to be heard, runners asking for headquarters, someone swearing at a jammed weapon, someone praying too loudly, someone laughing in a way that has no humour in it. In that confusion, the rules that followed the soldier into battle became anchors. Mask when warned, keep low, keep the helmet on, do not bunch together, do not stop in the open, do not fire wildly, do not abandon the wounded if ordered to carry them, do not leave your unit, do not throw away your weapon, do not take cover so deeply that you never come out, do not spread rumours, do not shout false alarms, do not decide that the battle is over because your part of the field has gone quiet. The rule against false alarms is worth noticing. Under misbehaviour before the enemy, causing false alarms was a punishable offence. That may seem minor compared with running away, but in battle a false alarm could be dangerous. If one man shouted gas when there was no gas, men could mask unnecessarily, slowing movement and communication. If someone yelled that the enemy was behind them, a line might turn, fire on its own side or begin to withdraw. If a rumour spread that a flank had collapsed, men might act on fear rather than fact. Battle is already confusion. False alarm adds deliberate or careless poison to it. The army therefore tried to regulate speech in battle differently from speech in letters. In letters, the danger was saying too much to home. In battle, the danger was saying the wrong thing at the wrong second. A shouted word could redirect bodies. A rumour could move faster than an officer. A panicked man could make panic contagious. This is why calm became a military virtue. Not because calm was natural, because calm slowed the spread of bad information. There is a quiet cruelty in expecting men to be orderly under conditions designed by modern war to make order almost impossible. But the alternative was worse. Without some discipline, the battlefield would reduce units to individuals trying to survive separately. The army needed men to remain connected to a plan even as the plan became damaged. It needed them to remember the order when the officer who gave it was gone. It needed them to keep the mask on when they could barely breathe. It needed them to keep the helmet on when it felt useless. It needed them to move forward when every instinct said that staying in the shell hole was wiser. That shell hole deserves a moment because it represents one of the great temptations of battle. It is low. It offers cover. It may be half full of water, filth, pieces of equipment, or worse, but it is lower than the ground around it. A man under machine gun fire who reaches a shell hole may feel that he has reached the only safe place in the world. The order may be to advance, but the shell hole makes its own argument. Stay here, just for a minute. Let the others go, catch your breath. No one can see you. The next movement will kill you. Stay. Some men stayed too long, some because they were wounded, some because they were pinned down, some because their orders became impossible, some because fear finally won the argument. A later report might call it hesitation, straggling, failure to advance, or misbehaviour. The man himself might remember it as the place where his body refused to obey him. That is the hardest battlefield rule of all, the command to continue when the body has discovered a reason not to. And we should be careful with judgment here. It is easy, sitting in a safe room, to say what a soldier should have done. It is another thing to rise out of a shell hole into machine gun fire because a plan made earlier requires the movement. The army needed rules strong enough to compel that action. History needs enough honesty to admit what that action cost. By late 1918, American units had learned a great deal very quickly, but the learning was expensive. The AEF had entered a war shaped by years of European experience, and it had to adapt to artillery, machine guns, gas, wire, aircraft, tanks, and the demands of coalition warfare. The US Army Center of Military History's documentary series on the United States Army in the World War preserves extensive AEF records, including volumes on organisation, training with the British and French, operations, orders and staff reports, reflecting how large and bureaucratically complex the American war effort became. Behind every order in battle was that larger machinery: training schools, staff sections, gas officers, quartermasters, medical officers, intelligence reports, and commanders trying to turn millions of civilian bodies into a force that could move under fire, but the machinery always ended in a person. A young man with a helmet pressed low, a gas mask carrier against his chest, mud on his knees, rifle in hand, fear in his throat. The order reaches him. The alarm sounds. The barrage lifts. The line starts forward. Whatever he thinks of the war, whatever he wrote home, whatever he drank behind the line, whatever souvenir he put in his pocket, the rules now narrow to a few immediate commands. Keep your equipment, keep your place, keep moving, keep breathing only through the mask if gas is present. Keep your head down, keep faith with the men around you, do not let fear choose alone. The strange thing is that these rules did not make him less human. They reveal how human he was. A machine does not need courage to keep its helmet on. A machine does not feel the urge to tear off a mask. A machine does not want to drop weight and run. These rules existed because men had bodies that hurt, lungs that panicked, hands that shook, and minds that searched for escape. Discipline was the army's answer to that humanity, sometimes necessary, sometimes brutal, often both at once. By the time the firing eased, if it eased, the soldier might find that he had obeyed without remembering every decision. His hands had done what training taught them. He had masked when the alarm came, he had kept the rifle, he had followed the man ahead, he had stayed low, he had not run. Or perhaps he had failed in one of those things and now waited to learn whether the failure would be treated as understandable, punishable, or unforgivable. Battle did not end the rules. It produced reports, charges, commendations, burials, hospital records, and rumours. The army would sort the living and the dead, the brave and the accused, the wounded and the missing, the men who had held and the men who had broken. And once the army began that sorting, another part of the soldier's world came into view. The punishments were not always as dramatic as death sentences. More often they were confinement, hard labour, loss of pay, reduced rank, public shame, extra duty, or the long stain of a bad discharge. But the possibility of punishment followed every forbidden act we have been tracing. It followed the letter that said too much. The man who walked away, the drunk behind the line, the sentry who slept, the soldier who looted, the private who discarded equipment, the frightened man who disobeyed. Military law was the shadow cast by all these rules, and for the doughboy that shadow could stretch far beyond the battlefield itself. And once the battle had moved on, once the gas mask was pushed back into its carrier and the helmet stayed low on a tired head, once the rifle was still in the soldier's hands and not lying abandoned in a shell hole behind him, there remained one more thing following him. It did not make a sound like artillery. It did not smell like gas. It did not shine like a flare in the night. Most of the time it lived in papers, rosters, orders, charge sheets, guard reports, signatures, witness statements, and the memory of officers who had seen too much and trusted very little. It was military law. And for the American doughboy in World War I, military law was not something that appeared only when a man committed a spectacular crime. It was the quiet structure underneath everything he was not allowed to do. We have been walking through restrictions one by one. Do not say too much in a letter. Do not walk away from the line. Do not drink yourself useless behind the front. Do not gamble until money turns into trouble. Do not enter forbidden districts. Do not light a match at night. Do not sleep on sentry. Do not take what is not yours. Do not remove the gas mask. Do not throw away the rifle. Do not disobey the order. But behind every one of those rules was the same final question. What happens if you do? That question mattered before the rule was ever broken. A soldier did not need to see a courtroom to feel military law. He felt it when a sergeant said his name at roll call. He felt it when a pass had an hour written on it. He felt it when the censor's mark appeared on a letter. He felt it when military police stood near a station. He felt it when the officer warned the company that the next man caught out of bounds would be made an example of. The punishment did not always have to happen. Sometimes the possibility of punishment did the work. The US Army in World War I operated under the Articles of War as revised in 1916, the legal code that governed soldiers, officers, courts-martial and punishable offences during the conflict. A broader survey of First World War military justice notes that the United States used those revised Articles of War while other armies operated under their own older military codes, many of which had been designed before anyone fully understood what trench warfare would become. That is important because these laws were not written for a gentle world. They were written for an institution that believed discipline had to survive fear, confusion, anger, hunger, homesickness, and the shock of modern weapons. The Articles of War divided courts-martial into three kinds: general, special, and summary. A general court-martial was the heaviest instrument, used for the most serious offences and empowered to impose the gravest punishments. A special court-martial handled lesser but still significant matters, while a summary court-martial could be conducted by one officer and dealt with minor offences more quickly. The articles gave special courts-martial limited powers of punishment, including no more than 6 months of confinement and limited forfeiture of pay, while summary courts-martial had still narrower limits. This means punishment existed on a scale. Not every offence sent a man into the darkest room of the legal system. Some misconduct meant extra duty, restriction, forfeiture, confinement, reprimand, or the humiliating experience of being made publicly accountable before the unit. But the scale could rise quickly. Imagine a doughboy in a muddy camp behind the line. He has overstayed a pass, not deserted, not betrayed anyone, not run to the enemy, not sold secrets, just stayed too long in a nearby town. Maybe he drank. Maybe he met someone. Maybe he missed the last lorry back. Maybe he simply could not bring himself to leave a warm room when he knew the barn waiting for him was cold and full of men coughing in the straw. By civilian standards, it might sound like a small thing. A young man late returning from town. In the army, it became absence without leave. The Articles of War defined absence without leave as failing to report at the fixed time to the appointed place of duty, leaving that place without proper permission, or absenting oneself from command, guard, quarters, station, or camp without leave. That dry sentence could swallow many kinds of human behaviour. It could contain the foolish private who stayed too long at a cafe, the homesick soldier who slipped away to see relatives before shipping out, the exhausted man who missed formation, and the frightened man who took one road too far from where he was supposed to be. The army had to sort them. Sometimes it did so with mercy, sometimes with indifference, sometimes with anger, especially if the unit was about to move, or the absence forced another man to take his place. This is something worth noticing. Military law did not only punish harm already done, it punished risk. A man absent at the wrong moment might have caused disaster even if he did not. A sentry asleep might have allowed a raid even if no raid came. A soldier drunk on duty might have endangered others even if nothing happened. A man who dropped ammunition might have left the squad short even if the next fight never developed. In civilian life, we often judge by the result. In military life, especially in war, the possible result mattered too. The army punished the open door before the enemy walked through it. Now take a more serious case. A man leaves with the intent to avoid hazardous duty or important service. The Articles of War treated that as desertion. They specifically stated that a person who quit his organisation or place of duty with intent to avoid hazardous duty or shirk important service was to be deemed a deserter. Desertion in time of war carried the possibility of death or another punishment directed by a court-martial. That is the kind of legal fact that seems almost unreal until you imagine it attached to one frightened body. The same road, the same footsteps, the same man moving away from the line could be judged differently depending on intent. Was he lost? Was he late? Was he temporarily absent? Or was he trying to avoid the thing the army required him to face? The problem, of course, is that intent lives inside a man. Courts had to infer it from behaviour. Did he take equipment? Did he head toward the rear? How long was he gone? Did he return voluntarily? Did he miss movement orders? Did he say anything to other soldiers? Did he have civilian clothes? Was he found hiding? Did he give a story that held together? The army turned panic, exhaustion, confusion, and evasion into evidence. Sometimes that evidence was clear. Sometimes it must have been painfully uncertain. And then there were the battlefield offences, the ones that brought military law closest to the sound of guns. The Articles of War defined misbehaviour before the enemy in sweeping terms: running away, shamefully abandoning a post, endangering a command through misconduct or neglect, speaking words that induced others to do the same, casting away arms or ammunition, quitting a post to plunder or pillage, or causing false alarms. The punishment could be death or another sentence decided by court-martial. Read that list slowly in your mind, not as legal language, but as moments. A man runs. A man drops his rifle. A man shouts that the flank has collapsed when it has not. A man leaves his assigned place because there is loot nearby. A man says something in panic and the panic spreads. These are not paperwork crimes. They are the cracks through which fear can pass from one soldier into many. The same was true for sentries. A sentinel found drunk, asleep on post, or leaving before properly relieved could face death, or another punishment if the offence occurred in wartime. We have already sat with that cold night and the man trying not to sleep, but now imagine the morning after he fails. He wakes because someone kicks his boot, or because a sergeant's voice cuts through him, or because another man has already taken his rifle from his slack hands. The enemy did not come. Nothing happened. That may be the worst part of it for him. He wants to say, no harm done. The army hears something else. The harm was that harm could have come. The post was unguarded, the trust was broken. The men behind him slept under a promise he did not keep. Punishment in such cases was not only about correcting one man, it was about warning every other man. This is why shame mattered so much. Military punishment has always had a public character. A man punished quietly may suffer. A man punished visibly becomes a message. His name read out, his sentence announced, his loss of rank observed, his confinement known, his extra duty seen, his dishonourable discharge whispered about. The army did not merely punish the body, it punished reputation, and reputation inside a unit could be as real as any sentence. A man who had been caught stealing from civilians might serve his official punishment and still carry the stain among the men. A soldier who slept on post might never be fully trusted again. A drunk who caused the company to lose passes could become hated for weeks. A deserter returned to his unit, if returned at all, had to live among men who knew he had tried to leave them. Shame did not require a prison wall. It could sit beside a man at mess, follow him into formation, and wait for him whenever someone asked, "Where were you that night?" This is one reason punishment could be both formal and informal. The formal system had charges, investigations, courts, sentences, approvals, and records. The informal system had silence, contempt, jokes, exclusion, suspicion, and the memory of the squad. An officer could reduce a sentence. A commander could remit punishment, but he could not easily command men to forget. The army's paper law and the unit's social law worked beside each other, sometimes reinforcing, sometimes contradicting. The formal process itself was not completely without protections, though it was still built for discipline first. The Articles of War required that charges and specifications be signed under oath, and stated that no charge should be referred for trial until after a thorough and impartial investigation, with the accused given an opportunity to cross-examine available witnesses and present matters in defence or mitigation. That sounds reassuring, and in some cases it may have been. But we should not imagine a modern civilian courtroom with all the distance and procedure that phrase might suggest. This was an army at war. Time was limited. Legal expertise varied. Command pressure mattered. The broader scholarship on World War I military justice emphasises that military justice primarily existed to maintain discipline, with individualised justice often a secondary concern, and that punishment could be swift and harsh depending on the army, the situation, morale, and discipline in the unit. That phrase, justice as a secondary concern, is hard to sit with. It does not mean every court was fake or every sentence unfair. It means the institution had a purpose larger than the accused man. In civilian court, at least in principle, the person on trial is the centre of the room. In a wartime court-martial, the person on trial was also a lesson being considered for everyone not yet on trial. The army asked, "What did this man do?" But it also asked, "What will happen to the command if men believe this can be done without consequence?" Here is the uncomfortable balance. If discipline collapses, soldiers die. If discipline becomes blind, soldiers are crushed. The army had to hold men under conditions that would make many human beings break. It had to punish desertion, cowardice, looting, drunkenness, disobedience, and sleeping on post because those things could destroy an army from within. But it was punishing men whose failures often grew out of the very conditions the army itself required them to endure. Fear, cold, noise, lack of sleep, bad food, disease, homesickness, trauma, mud, shellfire, waiting. The law judged the moment of failure. The man had lived everything that led to it. The American case in World War I is particularly interesting because the most extreme punishments for desertion were not carried out in the way they were in some other armies. According to the International Encyclopedia of the First World War, from April 6, 1917 to December 31, 1918, the US Army charged 5,584 troops with desertion and convicted 2,657. 24 convicted deserters were sentenced to death, but none were executed. The same account notes that Pershing confirmed death sentences in 44 criminal cases carrying the death penalty, and that the army executed 33 men for murder or rape, not for desertion. That distinction is important. The legal shadow of death hung over desertion, but the American army did not shoot its deserters in World War I. For a soldier hearing the law, the threat was real. For historians looking back, the practice was more restrained than the statute allowed. That does not make the system gentle. A man did not have to be executed to have his life altered. Confinement could be brutal. Hard labour could break the body. Loss of pay could punish a family at home as much as the man. Dishonourable discharge could follow him after the uniform came off. Reduced rank could humiliate a non-commissioned officer who had built his identity around authority. Public reprimand could burn worse than a private beating. Restriction to camp could mean every other man went into town while he remained under guard, visible in his disgrace. Punishment could be designed not just to hurt but to instruct. Imagine a soldier sentenced to hard labour. Not a phrase in a record, but a day. He wakes under confinement, not because the bugle calls the whole company to duty, but because punishment has its own schedule. He may break rocks, dig, haul, clean, carry, repair roads, or perform some exhausting task under supervision. The work may not be very different from labour he has done before as a soldier, but its meaning is different. Ordinary fatigue duty serves the army. Punitive labour marks the man. Everyone knows why he is there. The body works, but the shame works too. Loss of pay had its own quiet reach. Many soldiers sent money home. A mother, wife, child or sibling might depend on that allotment. When a court-martial forfeited pay, the punishment crossed the Atlantic in another form. A household that had done nothing wrong could feel the soldier's misconduct in unpaid bills, delayed purchases or worry. Military law could therefore extend into kitchens and boarding rooms in America, places where no one had ever heard the officer read the charge. Dishonourable discharge was perhaps the longest punishment because it changed the story a man could tell after the war. To come home honourably was not just administrative. It meant he had fulfilled the bargain. He had gone where he was sent, endured what was required, and returned with his status intact. To come home dishonoured was something else. Employers might ask. Families might know. Veterans' communities might close ranks. A man who survived the war physically could still find that the army had marked his name in a way that made civilian life narrower. This is why shame belongs in the same sentence as punishment. Punishment was what the army imposed. Shame was what followed when the punishment entered the social world. A man might survive confinement and still not survive how others looked at him. He might insist that he had reasons. He might even have had reasons. But the official label could flatten those reasons into a single word: deserter, thief, coward, drunk, insubordinate. The words were simple because institutions prefer simple words. Lives are rarely simple enough to fit them. At the same time, not every violation carried the same moral weight among soldiers themselves. Men had their own scale. A soldier who slipped away for food might be forgiven by his peers if everyone was hungry. A man who stole from a French civilian might be despised. A private who got drunk on pass might be laughed at unless he caused trouble for others. A sentry who slept could be condemned harshly because every man understood what was at stake. A soldier who panicked under shell fire might be pitied by some and judged by others, depending on what he did next and who suffered because of it. The army's law was written in articles. The soldier's law was written in memory. There were also commanders who understood that punishment alone could not hold an army together. The same account of American soldier attitudes notes that some stateside soldiers in training camps who went AWOL to visit family, especially during holidays, returned within 10 days to avoid desertion charges and were given an extra duty day rather than a harsher punishment. The army concluded that leave could improve morale and reduce AWOL cases. That detail matters because it complicates the image of military law as only a hammer. Sometimes officers chose the smaller punishment because they wanted men back in formation, not ruined. Sometimes a little mercy served discipline better than severity. A man who returned voluntarily after foolish absence might be more useful after extra duty than after a crushing sentence. Armies are stern, but they are also practical. Military justice in World War I lived inside that practicality. The army needed men. If it imprisoned every offender for long periods, it weakened itself. If it ignored offences, it weakened itself differently. If it punished too harshly, morale could sour. If it punished too softly, discipline could fray. Every sentence sat somewhere inside that calculation, even when no one said it aloud. What does this man deserve? What does the unit need? What example must be made? What mercy can be afforded? What will the others think? Now picture a court-martial room. It may not look dramatic. Perhaps it is in a building behind the lines, a schoolroom, a headquarters office, a room borrowed from civilian life and temporarily turned into a place of judgment. There are officers at a table, papers, a trial judge advocate, a defence counsel if available under the rules, witnesses waiting, the accused soldier standing or sitting stiffly, trying to look steady. Outside, the war continues with no respect for the seriousness inside the room. Trucks pass, men shout, a horse stamps. Somewhere distant, artillery mutters, the charge is read, the language is formal, the event beneath it may have been confused, muddy and fast, but now it is arranged into specifications. On or about this date, at or near this place, without proper authority, did absent himself, did wrongfully appropriate, did wilfully disobey, did sleep upon his post, did cast away arms, did use disrespectful language, the soldier hears his life turned into grammar. That transformation is one of the quiet violences of legal systems. The messy human moment becomes a sentence neat enough to punish. Maybe that neatness is necessary. Without it, courts cannot function. But something is always lost. The sore feet, the cold. The rumour that started the fear, the officer's tone, the previous week without sleep, the memory of a friend killed the day before, the shame that made a man lie when honesty might have saved him, the small detail no witness noticed. The whole interior weather of the accused disappears unless someone can speak it clearly enough to matter. And some men could not speak it clearly. They were young, they were poorly educated, they were frightened, they were angry, they did not know legal language. They might not understand what mattered most to say. A literate, confident man could defend himself differently from a confused immigrant, private with limited English. Military law applied to both, but equality under a rule does not always mean equality before a room of officers. Still, the records show not only punishment, but the army's attempt to maintain order through procedure. Charges had to be investigated, records had to be kept. Sentences required approval, and the approving authority had power to approve, disapprove, mitigate, or remit findings and sentences. The Articles of War stated that no court-martial sentence could be carried out until approved by the proper authority, and they allowed reviewing authorities to approve or disapprove all or part of a sentence. That meant a sentence was not always the end of the matter. It could be reduced, it could be remitted, it could be treated as too severe or legally insufficient. The system was not merely rage dressed as law. It was a disciplinary machine with valves. For the soldier, though, those valves may have felt far away. What he felt first was being accused, then waiting under arrest, restricted to quarters, perhaps in confinement if the offence was serious. The articles provided that a person charged with a serious offence should be placed in confinement or arrest as circumstances required, while minor charges did not ordinarily require confinement. Waiting could be its own punishment before sentence. Waiting while others marched. Waiting while rumours spread. Waiting while men who used to joke with you avoid your eyes. There is a particular loneliness in being separated from the unit by disgrace. A wounded man separated from his company might receive sympathy. A punished man received something more uncertain. He might feel wronged. He might feel guilty. He might feel both. The unit that had been oppressive before may suddenly seem like the only family available, and now he stands outside it. And for what? That is the question that must have haunted many men. For a bottle? For 1 hour late? For 1 moment asleep? For 1 pocketed watch? For 1 refusal shouted in anger? For 1 step backward? For 1 sentence said in fear? Military law's answer was often yes. Yes, because the small act was not small in context. Yes, because other men were watching. Yes, because the army cannot ask politely at the edge of battle. Yes, because discipline is made from thousands of small obediences, and every broken one threatens the whole design. We do not have to accept that answer without discomfort. In fact, we should not. The discomfort is part of understanding the war honestly. The army's reasons were real, and so was the soldier's suffering. Discipline saved lives, and discipline ruined lives. Shame prevented some men from failing, and shame crushed others after they had already been damaged by war. Law gave structure to chaos, and law sometimes mistook trauma for guilt. The same system that stopped looting and kept sentries awake also judged frightened men with tools that were often too blunt for the human mind under bombardment. By the end of the war, a doughboy who had followed the rules may not have thought of himself as someone shaped by law. He may have thought only that he did what he had to do. He kept his mouth shut when the censor required it. He returned from town on time. He stayed on post. He kept the match unstruck. He carried the mask. He kept his hands off civilian property. He obeyed orders he did not understand. He feared punishment sometimes, but more often he feared failing the men beside him. The law was there, but daily duty became habit. That may be the deepest point of all. Military law is most visible when someone breaks it, but its greatest power is in the men who never appear before it. The ones who almost overstayed the pass and then turned back. The ones who almost pocketed the watch and then left it. The ones who almost wrote the town name and then crossed it out. The ones who almost lifted the gas mask and then forced their hands down. The ones who almost slept on post and bit the inside of their cheek until pain kept them awake. The ones who almost walked away from the line and did not. So when we ask what US soldiers were not allowed to do during World War I, we are really asking what kind of life the army built around them. It was a life of restrictions so ordinary and so severe that they reached into speech, movement, pleasure, darkness, property, equipment, fear, and reputation. A doughboy was not only forbidden from acts that looked obviously criminal, he was forbidden from many things civilians do without thinking. Speaking freely, going where he wished, sleeping when exhausted, lighting a cigarette in the dark, choosing comfort over equipment, telling the whole truth to his mother, deciding that his own fear had earned him the right to leave. The war took those choices and placed them under command. That was the bargain, if such a hard thing can be called a bargain. In exchange, the army gave him structure, comradeship, supplies, training, and a place inside a force large enough to matter. But it also gave him a shadow that followed every forbidden act. A shadow made of courts-martial, punishments, loss of pay, confinement, disgrace, and sometimes the possibility of death written into law even when not carried out. Imagine him one last time, not in the middle of a charge, not in a courtroom, not in a cafe or a trench at midnight, but after the armistice, when the guns have stopped and the silence feels too large to trust. He is still in uniform. The rules have not vanished just because the firing has ended. He still has officers. He still has duties. He still cannot simply go home because peace has been announced. His body has survived the war, but the army has not yet released it. He stands in a camp in France, or on a road, or near a railway siding, waiting for orders in a world where the worst noise has stopped but obedience remains. In his pocket, perhaps there is a letter he was allowed to keep. In his pack, perhaps a legal souvenir, or none at all. On his record, perhaps nothing shameful, which is its own quiet achievement. He has done 1,000 things no one will praise because they were expected. He came back on time, he stayed awake, he held his tongue. He did not run, he did not take what would have disgraced him. He kept the mask on, he kept the rifle, he carried the weight. Not perfectly, perhaps. No human being moves through war perfectly, but enough. And when he finally goes home, the rules will loosen. He will speak more freely, though maybe not fully. He will walk streets without a pass, though some part of him may still notice where authority stands. He will sleep in a bed without waiting for stand to, though sleep may not always come easily. He will light a match without thinking, or perhaps he will think of one night when a flame could have killed him. He will sit at a table and say little, while someone asks what the war was like, and he realizes that the honest answer is too large, too muddy, too regulated, too full of things he was not allowed to do and things he was ordered to do anyway. The forbidden parts will not appear on memorials. Memorials prefer sacrifice, courage, names, dates. But the forbidden parts were part of the sacrifice too. The surrender of ordinary freedoms, the narrowing of personal choice, The constant awareness that one small human impulse could become a military offence. That was one of the quieter burdens carried by American soldiers in the First World War. Not only the fear of the enemy in front of them, but the discipline behind them, around them, and eventually inside them,